The Thursday, November 5th, 2020, we're Montgomery County Council work session, meeting and work session. We are now off of recess. The next item that we are working on is item number 4. And Councilmember Reamer, did you want to introduce this as the chair of Fed, or who should we turn to?
Thank you. Why don't we let's just go right to staff. Thank you very much. I will proceed at times to articulate the committee recommendation if I think that it's helpful.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, Dr. Orland, I guess you're leading it off? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. We're continuing with the transportation-related issues in the SSP and the impact tax bill. You made a little progress the last work session. We're just continuing. So the bottom page 1, the next issue, one of the comments that the county executive made in his comments was he believed the impact tax, and we're talking about the transportation impact tax now, of course, the impact tax rates in the red policy areas were too low and they should be raised. 4 years ago, when the planning board presented a new way of organizing the impact tax and the SSP into the 4 colored areas, red, orange, yellow, and green, they did a couple of things. First of all, they looked at the total amount of transportation capacity projects and their costs across the county, but then provided a ratio of what each area should pay as a function of the non-auto driver mode share, as well as VMT, vehicle miles of travel. And the council made some changes to that, but in the red area, they kept it as the planning board had recommended it. And so it was based on how much construction there would need to be in transportation capacity projects in the red areas from now until build out. And so the joint committee recommendation, it was both Fed and GO, agreed unanimously not to raise the rates in the red areas based on the county executive's recommendation.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is one that came up very late. It was after the committee work sessions have been completed, so there's no committee recommendation on this. There'll need to be a motion at some point. And Pam, if you would, Pam is helping me today share the screen because I'm technologically challenged getting to share a screen. So if you could share the screen of Circle 6, and I'll talk about this. You see what you're looking at is the Shady Grove Metro Station policy area. And the area that's circled in black are really 2 parcels, both belonging to the King family. The parcel that's in red within that black line is King Buick property along the west side, southwest side of Rockville Pike. And the rest of it, for the L-shaped parcel, also belongs to the King family, but that's within the city of Rockville. So we're talking about 2 properties which are adjacent to each other, one in the city, one outside the city. EYA wants to develop both parcels into one consolidated residential development of multifamily low-rise and townhouses, 366 units. And they would like to see that whole area be treated as a red policy area, or get the red rates, if you will, the red policy area rates. And to do that, they've also asked the city to annex the King Buick property so they can go under the city's planning and zoning process for subdivision review and get the subdivision approved under the city's rules, and so they could have one consolidated development rather than having 2 ones that are not connected. So they've made that recommendation to the city, and the city concurs with EYA's proposal. And so what they're asking the council to do is to essentially designate that whole area within the black line as a red policy area, but recognizing that they're not going to be in the county anymore. They'll be in the county, but they'll be within the city. If you go to the next slide, Pam, appreciate that. This is the development they're talking about, and this is 355 is on the north of this slide, and if you can make it out, there is a red line which runs at right angles. It runs from the left, goes across the bottom third of the property to a certain point, and then it runs up to 355. That again distinguishes between the city parcel, which is to the right and below, and that the county parcel, which is, or the non-city parcel, which is to the left and above. And this is the development there. This is like a preliminary conception. It's a conceptual site plan is what this is, showing what they're talking about building. The issue, though, is that in the past, what we've done is we've always tried to draw these policy area boundaries for the cities to match their boundaries, because for the SSP, obviously anything within the city, the SSP does not apply at all. Impact taxes do apply within the city, but not the SSP. However, if we were to do that here and basically make this entire area as shown as part of the city, then it would be in the City of Rockville policy area, which is what we created, the council created, to be able to apply an impact tax there. And the impact tax in the City of Rockville policy area is that of an orange policy area. So effectively, it would change the area that's outside the city from a red to an orange, and EYA in the city doesn't want to do that. It's sort of counter to what they were looking for. So what is the effect of what they want to do? If you look at the bottom of page 2 of the packet, you'll see a chart I put together. If this area were developed and the same number of units were going in, excuse me, same number of units were going in the two parcels as opposed to just the one, the transportation impact tax total would be about $3.2 million. If it were all in the red area, it would be $1.8 million, it would be 1.85. So it'd be $1.35 million less in impact taxes that EYA would be paying. The school tax, impact tax, by the way, is not affected by this because the whole thing is in an infill area, and so we'd get the infill rates, and the current infill rate would have them pay close to $4.3 million. So the total impact tax under the current way of splitting the property would be about $7.5 million, but what EYA and the city is proposing, the total would be 6.1. So again, about 1.35 million less. If you go to the next page, page 3, there's another aspect to this, which is that transportation impact taxes collected in the city of Rockville, and this is true for Gaithersburg too, can only be spent on projects that are in a signed MOU between the city and the county. And so they can't be used just for any capacity project in the county. It's sequestered strictly for that reason. And for the sake of argument, for the sake of this discussion, let's call that the Rockville account. And so if the two properties were still remain separate, there would be $2.25 million going into the Rockville account and $948,000 going into the general district account. General district is the account for the county as a whole. However, if the area is annexed and that entire area is made a red area, the entire 20 acres would be in the red area, then the Rockville account would receive $1.8 million, and the general district would receive no funds because it'd be entirely inside the city. And so what this means is that in this proposal, there would be $1.35 million less collected. About 400,000 of that, 400,000 less is collected for the Rockville account. That can be used for Rockville projects, that the city and the county agree on, and 948,000 less in the county as a whole. So it has for the county's point of view, it has a negative fiscal impact of the amount that I just mentioned. On the other hand, we're talking about a residential development, which if is put together into one parcel would be probably more comprehensively developed parcel than they were developed separately. It's no guarantee that you'd have the same number of units in the two separate parcels, and if you have one consolidated parcel, that's another factor. Another factor, and this is the last factor, believe me, is that if you go to the next slide, Pam, what you'll see is, I'm sorry, just for a second here. I've got to update my, I apologize for this. I have the computer shutting down. Okay. If you go to the next slide, what you'll see is a map which shows the Shady Grove policy area again, and that white line is the half-mile walkshed. And the properties we're talking about are beyond the half-mile walkshed. It's not far beyond. It's a little bit, yeah, that, what she's circling right there is the King Buick property, and just to the right of that, in the tan area, that, there you go, is the other parcel that's in the city. So, you know, we try to follow this rule generally, that we stay within a half mile. And this wouldn't be. This would be extending essentially the red area beyond it. But you can see a lot of Shady Grove already is beyond a half mile. And I have to say, if we're to show you maps of all the policy areas, Shady Grove is really an outlier. And there's a long history to this, which I will not go into, as to why it's that much bigger. But it is. And so there's a lot of property that's beyond half mile. So that's sort of a downside to including that in a red area. But so in the end of the day, I didn't have a recommendation on this one or the other, because I can see arguments for and against doing this. But if you want to do this, then the way I would suggest doing this is to take that 20-acre property, the two parcels together, and say that in the resolution, the SSP resolution, that upon annexation of the King Buick property, then that 20-acre property, and we could show it a map in the SSP if we need to, would be essentially a satellite of the Rockville Town Center policy area. And if you can go to the next slide, Pam, this is the last slide. There you go. There you see the Rockville Town Center policy area and the half-mile walkshed. You see it's pretty close correlation there. But the reason why I wanted to show you this was we have a predicate for creating a policy area within the city where the SSP does not apply, and it's really only there so that you could apply the red area impact tax. And so in the town center area, they are charged the much lower impact tax. And so what I'm proposing is essentially the combined King property be part of the Rockville Town Center policy area, but it would be like a satellite from it. And that's the issue.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. You know, let me just say very clearly, I am in favor of this. This piece of property was a part of the King, literally the King farm when it was farmed, and of course there was various family members and parts of some of the land. So I think this makes sense. I think it makes sense for the city of Rockville. I think it would not make sense if it were to be developed, that some of it would be in the county and some of it would be in the city. And I think that is the proper thing to do. I understand that Glenn's suggestion is a little confusing and maybe convoluted in some ways, but whatever it takes in order to get it to the right spot is what I'm in favor of. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Well, I will move I guess it's not the staff recommendation, but the staff guidance as to how to proceed with this in the event that we want to accede to the request. I would certainly prefer that the city of Rockville de-annex the land to the county and allow us to, allow it to remain in the county. That would ensure a stronger fiscal position, I think, for the county. But I understand, that's not a reasonable ask, and I don't think it's also reasonable to demand that the developer essentially go through two completely separate approval processes, which is what would have to happen in order to develop under two jurisdictions. And it's just a unavoidable reality of a complex situation. So perfectly willing to, support the request from the city and from EYA and make it all in the red zone. So Glenn, you've provided that recommendation. Is there a distinction? I'm happy to do it as a satellite of the Rockville Town Center, as you suggest. That sounds fun. I don't get
the alternative is to create a King Buick policy area. I don't think anybody wants that.
I would do that. Yeah.
Okay. So I move that.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Navarro, Mr. Conklin did want to speak.
I just wanted to identify the half-mile walk shed, and this was already at the fringe of that policy area. No argument with the annexation questions or having it be uniform, but it did seem more appropriate that it be orange than red. But it sounds like the council has already kind of determined a direction on this.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, the problem with that is it would require the city to de-annex, and I'm not sure if that's doable. And the longer term concern, and it's not, there's nobody proposing this, but if this is used as a predicate for annexations further north on 355 up to Shady Grove Road, now you're talking about properties that are much further away from half a mile. And I think we want to have some kind of different result from that. But again, no one's proposing doing anything like that right now, but I could see this being used as a predicate, many years in the future.
Okay. So we have a motion by Councilmember Reamer. We have a second by Councilmember Navarro. Is there any additional conversation on this? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Councilmember Jawando just called me and it was a bad connection. He's not on the call. Are you on the call, Councilmember Jawando?
I am. I'm just off camera for the next 5 minutes, but I'm in favor. I'm raising my hand virtually.
Okay. All right. Hey, very good. So everybody's hand is up, including yours, Councilmember Jawando. Thank you. That passes unanimously. Dr. Orland.
Okay. The next issue was the proposal from Councilmember Friedson, and rather than my talking about it, why don't I just turn it over to him, and he'll explain the proposal. I think it's changed maybe a little bit from when he first proposed it. And then Mr. Sartori has done his own fiscal impact analysis of this, which I sent around to you literally 10 minutes before the meeting. Just got it, and he can walk his way through through his email. So, Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Orland. I will allow for Mr. Sartori to explain the fiscal analysis, but I think it says what we have been suggesting all along, that this is an important proposal, but a modest proposal, and one that he can share the details of from a fiscal standpoint. We are making two modest changes to what is a modest proposal, in keeping with the spirit of it, but addressing two issues. One is just like was done previously, reflecting the wishes of the city of Rockville, who is hopes to be exempted from the opportunity zones. We're also going to exempt them from this, so excluding the city of Rockville from the desired growth areas. And the other note is that rather than create a new factor of 0.6, which is between the red policy area of a 0.4 factor and the orange of a 1.0, we're going to do a discount. I'm proposing that we do a discount of 0.4. So the reason for that is in the orange areas, it's the same as what we had proposed, 0.6, but there are certain parts of the desired growth areas that are in yellow, and it was not intended that those get a bigger discount than the orange. And so this would go from, in those areas, from a 1.25 factor to a 0.85 factor. And so it would be a 0.4 discount for both, but would be different costs there. The couple other notes that I wanted to say, one, this, as I said before, reflects our two major goals. One is to promote and support BRT and other transit, those two broader public policy goals, without a unintended consequence of the initial proposal, which is the discount in schools, which really this has nothing to do with. The desired growth areas are really about access to transportation and to transit for jobs, for housing, and for placemaking, and this would allow us to be able to do that in both those areas. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Sartori, who could explain the fiscal analysis at this point.
Could I just jump in just for a sec before Jason starts? Pam, if you could show circle 16. What we're showing you is it's in the packet. It's the map of the desired growth areas.
All right,
just the
give me
areas.
just a second.
Okay, and there's something else I want to mention anyway while you're doing that. When Mr. Friesen says they're reducing the factor by 0.4, what that means in lay terms is that the in red areas it would be a 40% reduction. In the yellow areas it would be a 32% reduction.
In the orange areas. You said
Orange.
What I say right? Oh, I'm sorry. Orange area. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Orange areas reduction by 40%. Yellow areas reduction of 32%. And then Pam, if you can get there you go. If you can make that bigger, I don't know if you can. Bring that up. Just make it a little larger. There you go. And so the green areas are the desired growth areas. Of course, this map includes those green areas which are also in red areas, which Mr. Friesen's proposal would not apply into. So you have to think in your mind to subtract out of here, Friendship Heights, Twin Brook, Shady Grove, all those. And also wherever you see an opportunity zone or a enterprise zone, and those are shown on here sort of underlaid in a different color in red, it wouldn't apply there either because obviously the larger, the total exemption in enterprise zones and opportunity zones was what would govern there. But these are the areas we're really talking about other than that. I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So for the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department. First, just a real quick shout out to our mapping folks who've been working hard. John Ryder, who's done a lot of our transportation mapping, but also Lisa Gavoni, who you guys all know well. She's created the web map tool that we keep pulling up screenshots from. So thank you to them on that. So with regard to this proposal, in our last work session, you guys kind of tasked the planning department to try to get a better understanding of the potential fiscal implications of the council member Friesen's proposal. And so we applied kind of the same analysis that we've been doing in conjunction with, in collaboration with OMB, using the pipeline data that we have. Now, to be very clear, we don't think that the pipeline is like an accurate representation of a forecast of what we expect these decisions to yield in terms of actual impact tax revenue over the next X number of years. In part because that pipeline changes on a weekly basis as certain projects are completed or they lose their APF, their adequate public facilities approval, it expires, or as new projects get approval from the planning board. It includes a lot of projects that will never ever get built. And there's no set time frame in that. Some projects might be done in 5 years, some projects might be done in 20 years. And so you can't really assign a time frame to it. In particular with the transportation side, one of the more difficult things that we've had is being able to estimate the number of credits that an applicant might receive. They do get a good number of credits for transportation improvements that they make. And so in the end, what we've done is we've applied the different factors, the different rates that exist today, modified as Councilmember Friesen just indicated, to the existing pipeline. And what we saw when we applied it to the existing pipeline using the current, everything that exists as it exists today, it generated some $600 million in revenue, which that again is just a number, right? So we said, well, how can we get that to something that makes sense for what we know actually we get on an annual basis? So to kind of normalize that to an annual number that is inclusive of the credits that we can't really estimate right now, we divided that by 60 to get us to a number of $10 million per year, which is pretty consistent with what we actually get each year in transportation impact taxes. So kind of applying that to each of the different scenarios that we looked at, we had a scenario that we called the committee scenario, which is basically where the two committees, the GO and the Fed committee, came out with their recommendations, and those are the things that you, as a full council, have been considering. And then we applied it to Councilmember Friesen's proposal as well, and then to the alternate version that he just described a few minutes ago. And so in the end, the bottom line was, compared to the committee version that the council is currently working their way through, and the decisions that you've made are reflected in that, the difference is about an estimate of about $1.4 million per year. So that is what we would estimate the impact of Councilmember Friesen's proposal would be in terms of the loss in transportation impact tax revenue on an annual basis for the benefit of the incentive that in these desired growth areas. to encourage growth. And that would be applied to both commercial and to residential uses.
Appreciate that, Mr. Sartori. I'd like to move the amended proposal reflecting the exclusion of City of Rockville and the change to a 0.4 factor discount on the identified desired growth areas.
Thank you. It's been moved. It was seconded by Councilman Navarro. Did you second it, Councilman? Yeah. It was moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. Mr. Conklin, did you have a comment on this?
Thank you, Council President. I'm also channeling Mary Beck, who is unable to join us here today, and just wanted to reaffirm the challenges in the transportation CIP, and that this is a further reduction in the available resources to fund that activity. I do want to recognize the improvement of the most recent proposal compared to the one we discussed last week, with its treatment of yellow and orange policy areas and more fairly addressing the potential discounts there. But nonetheless, we've also done some analysis, which we shared with Councilmember Friedson, that about 70% of the impact eligible CIP projects directly affect or are within these designated growth areas. So there's certainly a need for the investment to support the desired activity in these areas, and we'd like to see those funds remain available. Much like the council considered the purple line change in the zones for the purple line at a time when it was more certain that those projects would happen, I'd just like to make the point that both the 355 and the Veers Mill Corridor BRTs are not yet funded for construction. So that principle that you've used with the purple line, that when you have confidence the service will be available, is the time to incentivize the activity in those areas, isn't really present on much of these two corridors. I just wanted to share that perspective with the council and ask for your consideration of those views. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Raymer.
Thank you. Want to speak in favor of the proposal. I think that, but I'll start by saying, and as I said this last time we met, I think it's important that we pass an SSP policy overall that raises more money, not less. So I understand the concern about impact on the capital budget and our ability to invest in transportation programs and housing and other important needs. But we're not looking at this in isolation, and we'll have an entire multi-dimensional package to ultimately approve. And I think this one is just recognizing the reality that we're not getting the kind of projects that we want. While we are getting what little development we get is often in our desired growth areas, it's not nearly what it used to be or what we want. And the dated infrastructure, the revitalized or unredeveloped shopping centers and parking lots, along a lot of these corridors are testament to the slow progress. The White Flint sector plan years ago was a bold vision for a corridor city up and down Rockville Pike. Other than, a few small projects here and there, and then one developer that can afford not to make money in the short term, not much is happening. I think we got to recognize those kinds of problems across the board and make big changes. So I support this proposal. I think it'll be helpful to reducing the barrier to getting new investment where it applies.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Director Conklin, could you repeat what you said, channeling Mary Beck? I appreciated that comment about the 70% number and that concern. I just want to make sure I understood what you said there.
Yeah, absolutely. Impact taxes are eligible for use on certain types of projects, mostly those that expand capacity. And we took a look at the eligible projects within the CIP and where they were located. And about 70% of the eligible spending of impact taxes is within or directly supporting these zones. So that was The only point of that is to say that there's been an argument that we don't need to invest to the same degree in transportation projects where we're trying to focus transit-oriented development. And that analysis shows that actually our investments are geared exactly to support this development.
The opposite. It's the opposite.
Well, we have to be careful not to reduce the funding to support the infrastructure that's necessary to realize the vision from the land use side that we want. The county has done a good job in focusing our investment that way, but at the same time, we're having a discussion about reducing the revenues to support that investment today.
Right. And I appreciate that. And the analysis, Mr. Sartori, that you, and I appreciate the way you laid it out. You laid out a big number and then you kind of whittled it down based on what you thought was, it got really small based on what you thought was realistic. And you're saying that's basically your best estimate based on what's in the pipeline. If you could just explain that analysis one more time for me.
Sure. Yeah, and that's not based on historical approvals or historical permits or where construction has occurred. It's based on what's in our pipeline. So these are development applications, both commercial and residential, that have approvals that in some cases they've been there for years. In other cases, they were just approved a couple weeks ago. And so, you know, those numbers are based on where those are located. And so, you know, that may not be reflective of where future approvals or future development applications are located, but what I like about this analysis is that it allows us to compare the different scenarios using the same base set of data. So, you know, you're comparing apples to apples.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then my final question, Mr. Director Orland, I know you went over this, just
Director
Matt.
Give me a promotion.
Yeah, Director Conklin. And I'm coming to you, Mr. Anderson. Director Anderson is what I meant to say. I'm going to ask you a question too, Mr. Orland.
Yes, sir.
The where this applies, the map of where it applies again. Could you just bring that up one more time, Ms.
Pam,
Dunn?
if you could do that. That's circle 16.
Okay, there we go. And if you're saying okay, there we go.
Now, these are all the desired growth areas, but Mr. Friesen's proposal would not apply them in the metro station policy areas. So Mr. Reamer mentioned White Oak, White Flint. It doesn't, I think he mentioned White Flint. It doesn't apply to White Flint anyway. It wouldn't anyway because we don't collect transportation impact taxes in White Flint. Mm-hmm. But there's none of the metro station policy areas, none of the purple line policy areas, and also wherever there's an enterprise zone and opportunity zone where there's a total exemption, at least by what the council said so far, it wouldn't apply there either. So it'd be less area than what you see in green here.
Okay, thank you. You can unshare that. Go ahead, Chair Anderson. I know you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, to Chris Conklin's point, I'm sure it's correct that there are a lot of transportation projects that wind up occurring in these orange areas or yellow areas that are covered by this proposal. That doesn't mean that the transportation impact that is causing the demand for those transportation facilities are generated entirely or even mostly by things that are right next to them. So, for example, almost everybody in the county uses 355. Many people use George Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, these major arterials. Almost everybody's using the Beltway, anybody who has a car anyway. That doesn't mean that projects that are getting built right next to the Beltway or right next to 355 or right along George Avenue are responsible for generating the impact. In fact, to the contrary, the data that was produced that underpins the red, orange, yellow, green typology that the council adopted in 2016 is based on a recognition that the projects that get built adjacent to those major transportation corridors are actually generating less demand, even though they're right next to it. The users are coming from all over the place. So that's the first point, is just because you've got a lot of transportation projects in these areas doesn't mean development in those areas is primarily responsible for creating the demand that makes those necessary or important to invest in. The second thing I want to mention is that the questions about the pipeline estimates, we've used that as the benchmark for deriving these estimates because we want to give you an apples to apples comparison. but we absolutely do not agree with OMB's premise that pipeline is the best or even a very good measure of using to estimate the cost of any of these proposals, because it tends to overstate the amount of development that will occur compared to the amount of development as measured by actual building permits pulled or other measures of development activity that actually happened over the last 5 years, decade, whatever time period you want to talk about, is much less than what's in the pipeline. The pipeline is, people submit development applications. Some of them will never get built. Others will get built only after many years. And we think that that's not a very good way to estimate cost. But we've given you those numbers in that form because that was how OMB tried to estimate the cost of every other proposal in the SSP. So we wanted to do that for the sake of consistency. The important thing to recognize is that that tends to put this estimate on the high side of what we think is realistic. And even then, it's relatively modest.
Right. Thank you. Director Conklin, do you have anything to add?
One last point on the investment. I don't argue with Casey about the overall framework for green, yellow, orange, red, potentially purple. But the nature of the investments is not necessarily related to traffic generation here. A lot of the investment is pedestrian bike facilities and transit capacity that supports these areas. So the impact tax is supposed to invest in all of these modes that are necessary to make the development work. And with that, I don't have anything more to add.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's the rub for me. And I think, and I'm wrapping up here, Mr. President. I just think the overall trend of the SSP, and I appreciate it. I think earlier colleagues said that, we want to raise more money, not less. I mean, the overall trend here has been down. And Dr. Orland, you're not on mute, just in case.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
And to your point, Director Conklin, that this connects to pedestrian infrastructure, other things, the impact of what's happening in these areas. I just think that it's directly connected to the investments we want. And the fact that it's modest, I think actually works against it in my view, because if it's modest, it's not going to have the incentive impact that I think that the proponents necessarily want, but we do need that money for the infrastructure where the development is occurring, at least to some extent already. So all that was helpful for me. And I while I'm okay with the exemption for Rockville, I think we need to keep this revenue for these improvements. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate Councilmember Jawando going through some of those questions and reviewing the map again, because I'm not quite sure that a blanket discount in the designated growth policy area is necessary in the way that it's being proposed. Because if a developer or someone needs assistance with a project, they can come to us and ask for assistance, as they have been doing and as has been done. And the bill, the legislation that we passed a few weeks ago about Metro and about growth at our metro stations, that was only targeted to the WMATA land at metro stations, and it didn't apply to large geographic areas. And so, I think also that we need these funds to build sidewalks and bike lanes and other infrastructure projects that residents are demanding. And I think the point that Councilmember Jawando just made about it being a modest change, I support the original committee recommendation, which was already a fee reduction. And this is yet another fee reduction, and a modest one at that. But I think we need to invest in our infrastructure, and we won't have enough funding to do that if we keep reducing all these fees. So at this point in time, I cannot support this proposal.
Thank you. Councilmember Auburn-Oz.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Yet another very healthy, solid discussion. A lot of good points raised on all sides. I think that, staying consistent for me with erring on the side of taking some chances here, and in an effort collectively to try and spawn development in areas that everyone agrees we need, everyone agrees we want. And there are pits and takes here. I get that. But I think in this case, it's a creative solution that compounded with some of the other decisions we're making within the SSP makes it even more likely, in my opinion, that we'll attract the kind of development that we want to see. And I certainly acknowledge and appreciate and respect the concern over the loss of any money within our CIP, because we know that that total is going to shrink, not expand over time, at least in the short term. I think if we are successful in making these investments over the long term, it provides a stronger base from which we'll be able to draw from, so that future CIPs actually do have the revenue that they need, do have the support that they need to be able to get off the ground. And I just think that continuing on the path we've been has not produced the results that we need. And so that's why I support this proposal, because it's in line with previous proposals, which I think get us where we want to be, acknowledging there's some downsides here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I too am supportive of Councilmember Friedsen's the next speaker, but let me just say, I too am supportive of this. I believe there is times that you have to make an investment, and this is the way for us to make an investment so that our future looks better than what we've had in the past. Councilmember Friedsen.
Well, I had some brilliant comments that I was going to make, but I think I just counted to 5. So I will, in the interest of time, just say that we should call the vote.
You really are into accounting, aren't you? Wow, that's good. Yeah. It's been moved by Councilmember Friedsen, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor of this amendment, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Friedsen, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Albornoz, and Councilmember Rice, and me. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Juando, Councilmember Vice President Hucker, and Councilmember Glass. So it passes 6-3. Thank you very much. Who is next? Who's going to, Dr. Orland, are you continuing this conversation?
Yes, sir. Okay, we're on top of page 5. In the last work session, you agreed to create a whole set of purple line policy areas, but you haven't yet decided what that means in terms of what the impact tax rates should be there, or what the level of service or the congestion standard should be in those areas. Currently, the purple line policy areas are all in what's called the orange zone. And so the impact taxes there are 150% higher than the red area. Or the other way of looking at it is the red areas are 60% lower than the orange area. Also, the level of service standard, the congestion standard is at intersections is 80 seconds per vehicle. That's how much delay you would allow, as opposed to a red area, which is 120 seconds per vehicle. And that's a separate issue we'll be talking about even later. The planning staff in the staff draft recommended that those areas around the purple line should fall midway between what is now orange and what is now red, recognizing that the light rail, although it's a massive improvement over on-the-road bus service, it's not in the same category as Metro Rail in terms of service. The planning board, however, when it met on this and made its recommendation, decided to recommend them all as red policy areas. So in the red policy areas, it would have the same standard, same tax rates as in metro stations, and the at least initially the same congestion standard as red areas. Although they have a different recommendation a little later on about not having congestion standards in red areas. And my analysis basically came out down on the side of the planning staff's proposal. If you look at the chart at the bottom of page 5, you'll see that, in fact, purple line, although it would be big improvement, is not the same as Metro Rail. The peak period frequency, how often the trains run, only half as often. The speed is about a third less, and the capacity is only 1/6 of what Metro Rail is. And so I think the planning staff had it right. When it went to the Fed committee majority, Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friedsen, agreed with the planning board, and Mr. Juando agreed with planning staff and myself.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer.
Oh, I should say one more thing. The rate table on the top of page 6 shows the current transportation impact tax rates, and it shows a separate column for what these purple policy areas would be if there were a new category to show you precisely what the rates would be. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. Well, I think we might want to hear from Chair Anderson as well. But I wanted to just say that, there's several things at play here. One of them is how much congestion do you try to solve for? And the consequence of trying to solve significantly, for a non-red station policy area versus a red station policy area, the difference is more akin to solving in an urban way versus solving in a more suburban way. And I think that the Purple Line station areas are generally places where we want to really prioritize a different kind of approach. So that was a big part of it. A second part is, again, very similar to the conversation that we just had about, coming up with a more realistic tax rate for impact taxes on the transportation side. That we want development to come around the Purple Line. It is what our vision is for the county, and the more barriers we put in front of that, the less we're going to get. And so we're trying to take on a more aggressive posture here about transit-oriented development, and really, move more aggressive, move more directly there. So this would set the tax rate really at, I think, what is appropriately a more of a transit-oriented development tax rate, recognizing that you ultimately have more trips that are walking and biking. You have fewer vehicle trips you're trying to solve for. You have lower costs to do that. So it all kind of ties together. So I commend the committee majority's recommendation to you, and I'd ask if Chair Anderson wants
Well, before you do that, Councilmember Navarro is the other chair. Would like to speak.
remember where we're going.
I wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
this
thank you.
was a FedGeo recommendation. It was not just a Fed recommendation, and
Right,
the majority of the Joint Committee decided to side with the Planning Board. I want to also clarify, I guess, further explain that, at least for me, every time that we would adopt a particular master plan that had a Purple Line station slated to be there, we always looked at this as this incredible opportunity for transit-oriented development. And we, at least I don't remember having, extensive conversations about, at some point we're going to treat this very differently, than other types of metro stations. We understood that we wanted to incentivize as much as possible and create the scenario and the environment, the ecosystem for these particular, future Purple Line stations to have incredic activity. And so at least for me, that informed a decision to agree with the planning board's recommendation.
Thank you. And just to be very clear, it was a 3-2 vote.
Yes.
From the Joint Committee. It was Councilmember Friedson, Navarro, and Reamer agreed with the Planning Board. Councilmember Jawando and myself agreed with the planning staff / council staff recommendation. So
Yes, thank you.
Right.
I misspoke. Thank you.
Council, and with that, Mr. Anderson, please.
Well, I just want to underscore what Councilmember Reamer just mentioned about, it's not just about what is the rate that's charged. It's also about what kind of transportation ideas do you want to try to apply to these areas. And if you look at the map of this Purple Line corridor and the areas that would be included in these red zones, I think you would agree that they share a great deal in common with the existing red zones around metro stations, which is to say they're intensively developed. They're already proximate to a lot of other centers of activity. They're very walkable areas. They're the sort of places where we do not want to be widening the roads, adding turn lanes, those sorts of things that you would find appropriate in a more suburban context. So we think that in addition to the desire to incentivize development in these areas that are near this major public investment in the Purple Line, you also want to create the kind of places that will take maximum advantage of not just the transit, but the high quality urbanism that we're trying to achieve in as many places as possible. And on the revenue side, I would say that passage of question A, this is something I haven't seen really in the press at all, but I think that's tremendously significant for this discussion because as we discussed with the WMATA tax abatement bill, the long-term fiscal benefits, as well as the opportunity for private real estate development around transit is very high, but the upfront costs are also very high. So by reducing the upfront costs, and impact taxes are among the major upfront costs, we can encourage this kind of investment. And now that question A is passed, the county can enjoy the benefits of that more fully taking advantage of that land in the area around the Purple Line stations, and every taxpayer in the county will benefit from that. So now that we're free of that thicker restraint on the total revenue that can be raised, and we can instead have the county council setting a rate that allows the revenue to go up, I think the argument is even more compelling for a break at the front end so we can get that benefit over the life of the property as those places are redeveloped.
Thank you. Mr. Conklin.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that I believe that the staff position, the planning staff and council staff position on this, I think better reflects the reality of these areas where they are infill areas, smaller development opportunities, more existing neighborhood context than some of our downtowns, and that obviously we made a recommendation to defer on this altogether when it was first before council, but I believe that the staff recommendation is more consistent with our view on what's appropriate in these areas.
Thank you. Mr. Friedson, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate all the comments that have been made. I strongly support and continue to support the majority, joint committee recommendation. I think we have to remember here, this is about adequate infrastructure. It's also about appropriate infrastructure. And as Chair Anderson was mentioning, when we talk about what type of policy area this is, it also is what type of infrastructure do we believe is appropriate for that area. And if we wait until the Purple Line is built and completed before we start thinking about infrastructure in an appropriate way, or before building the type of mass that we want, both transportation critical mass and development and placemaking critical mass, we will have missed significant opportunities, and in some ways may have to undo the things that have been done. We are paying the price right now of infrastructure that is built that is inappropriate for the current uses of different parts of the county. And the cost of undoing the wrong infrastructure is dramatically higher than the cost of putting in place the right infrastructure. So, I think it's not just about what the incentive would be by reducing the impact tax barriers, which are some of the highest impact taxes in the country, highest in the region. But it's also about making sure that we have the context from an infrastructure standpoint to reflect not only the communities that we have today, but the communities that we desire to create and to build. For that reason, I think that the Joint Committee's recommendation is so important.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm going to pick up where Councilmember Friedson left off. Look, I understand these areas don't look like some of the other areas. That's undeniable. But the reality is that what we're trying to do is to try and make them like them. We're trying to spur and incentivize that growth. We're trying to incentivize investment. We're trying to make sure that people come to these areas and that they can spur economic development opportunities and those kinds of things. It's easier, quite honestly, at the other areas. the traditional red policy areas. To do that, where we have the Metro Red Line, I mean, it's easier to do that there. With exception, I mean, there still are exceptions there where we're challenged. I mean, Glenmont, namely, which we've been talking about with the WMATA bill. But let me just say this, that we can't talk both sides, right? We can't say that, yeah, we want to see economic development opportunities at Purple Line. It was transportation certainly led the effort, but I remember a lot of our conversation was about making sure that we had economic opportunities in these neighborhoods for people as well. And one of the best ways to do that is to incentivize that investment. And so from that perspective, that's why I'll be supporting this. I think it's the right thing for us to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council. Dr. Orland, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just respond to a couple points.
Well, no, before you do, let me ask Councilmember Jawando to speak, and then you can respond.
Sure.
Councilmember Jawando.
Dr. Orland, please respond.
Okay, thank you. First of all, in response to some of the things I've heard, Mr. Joanna's proposal, staff's proposal, is an incentive. It's a 30% reduction in the impact tax. So it's not like there's no reduction. Secondly, in response to Mr. Friesen's point about we don't want to have standards here which are not appropriate for more urban areas or for places where we want more walking and biking. When the council, when the planning board proposed and the council approved the Veersmore Road plan, it set a special congestion standard for Veersmore Road precisely to be able to allow for to not have as much in the way of road improvements there and to make it safer for biking and walking. What was that standard? It was 100 seconds per vehicle, which is exactly what the staffs are recommending here. Thirdly, the chairman mentioned that these areas are designed for intense development. When the master plans were done for Chevy Chase Lake and for Long Branch and for Tacoma Langley, it was not for intensive development. It was for more development, but not nearly as much as Bethesda and Silver Spring, and not to the same density. And for all those reasons, and a lot of these policy areas that would be covered by the Metro Station, by the Purple Line areas, are residential. The areas around Woodside, the areas around Littonsville, the areas around Dale Drive in Manchester are almost entirely residential. And so we're applying a red policy area, impact tax rate, and a congestion standard in a residential area. So again, these are all the reasons why we thought that I thought at least the planning staff had it right.
I appreciate that, Dr. Orland. And you laid the path for me here. So I think it's really important in this conversation. Everything is going down. It's like you go to the store and the everything's on sale. That's what this SSP is, and the way it's being presented. And so when we have this conversation about we need to do this and this is the real incentive, no, everything is already an incentive. And so it's a matter of degree. And we're all for transit-oriented development. Look, I lived in an apartment and a duplex in Long Branch, right in the area where one of these things is going to be created and where it's going to impact. And I've talked to many developers, and I'll quote one exactly. The smart money is on buying up as much contiguous property near these Purple Line stops as possible so that when the zoning changes come and the Purple Line is built, we can maximize and take advantage. They don't say, Michelle's going to be right behind me here. She's going to her meeting. They don't say when you lower the impact tax and create a red policy areas. They're going to do it if we keep it currently because the demand will be there for it. So the idea that there needs to be addition, someone bought the duplex I grew up in. And so this is going to happen. And I'm for incentivizing even more, which is what the middle of the road here does. It's 30%. But I think we do need to recognize that going to red cuts it in half again. For any, the amount of impact tax that we would be receiving to make the improvements we need to make. Again, not all necessarily road improvements. So I think we're already doing some incentive in an area that's already going to see growth and where there's already prospecting and we're already going to see development. And so I just think layering another is why I think this is the right proposal from this planning board staff to go on the middle ground here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Not much more to add, given the Joint Committee did already propose this. The majority of the Joint Committee did already propose this, but just want to reiterate what Councilmember Rice was saying is so true. I mean, part of this exercise is not just to respond to what's there, but also to continue to envision what we want. And once again, previous councils discussed ad nauseum so many different master plans predicated on future Purple Line stations. And that was the goal, that was the vision, that was the way that we were articulating many of the decisions that went into some of these master plans. It was that if we could incentivize, we would, because we recognize what's happening. And Chair Anderson made a good point as well regarding, question A. I mean, that is huge. We have not discussed that as much, and thank you, Montgomery County voters. Thank you, Moody's, for that particular credit positive signal, the announcement. Thank you, Councilor Pizza, because it is important to recognize that, question A was all about us, the leadership, having this incentive to create more revenue, to stimulate growth and economic activity. That's what it's all about. And now we have it. We have it here. After 30 years of a particular approach, we have this approach. So for me, yeah, every opportunity that gets us a little bit closer to making sure that we can have this vibrant activity, it's going to be multiplied. It's going to be something that it's a great return on investment. So that's the way that I'm coming, to this particular exercise. It is a shift. I understand. We're all very used to kind of doing things the way it's always been done. Hasn't necessarily yielded what we wanted it to yield, So anyway, I just really think that this is another really great opportunity. And, it's not, you're absolutely right, Councilman Jawanda. We supported your proposal for the school, impact with regard to the 2 and 3 bedrooms. There are puts and takes here that are important. But I think in general, especially after question A, this to me, it's an extraordinary way to position ourselves for that return on investment in its aggregate. It's not going to be just this one piece, but in its aggregate, I think that this is a really bold step and message that this council is sending forward, which, by the way, it's something that regionally, I'm really cheering for, because Montgomery County needs that. So anyhow, I guess, we do have a committee recommendation, and I guess we'll at some point dispose of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Joint committee recommendation.
Joint committee, right.
Joint committee recommendation.
This is a tough one for me because I see it from both sides, and I understand we need to, we have to have smart growth policies, and clearly development on the Purple Line is smart growth policy, and we all agree with that. But as I look at the table, the chart for the fees, there are a few things that I can't wrap my mind around. First two items are single family detached or attached house. I don't expect there will be any single family detached homes that are built around there, because that's not smart growth policy on the Purple Line. And if there are single family detached homes that are new, they'd be tear downs, and we don't charge any impact fees for them anyway. And then so basically it's going to be some level of high rise, mid rise, whatever it might be. And being fairly intimate with that area, the land has been bought. The projects are ready to be greenlit once the Purple Line comes through at whatever stage that happens, whenever, knock on wood, that happens. And as someone who is involved with various Purple Line efforts in the coordinating committee between Prince George's County and Montgomery County, the efforts that are currently underway are how to mitigate the growth that everyone expects to happen, and how we do so without having unnecessary displacement, without losing affordable housing. The question is not, will growth occur? It's how do we mitigate that growth and allow people who are still living there to enjoy the Purple Line when it comes. And so I don't view this as an incentive for growth around the Purple Line, because I think it's undeniable that growth is going to come at whatever stage when the Purple Line is done. And yet it's just another loss of revenue for things that we need. I don't view it as an incentive because it doesn't need incentive, because people have been buying the land, and groups and organizations and county government ourselves through the Purple Line Compact are trying to make sure that we mitigate the growth that we all already expect to come without any changes in these fees. And so for that reason, I don't support the joint position.
Thank you. We're going to call for the vote, but just let me be clear. This one was a tough one for me at joint committee. This is a tough one for me continuing. But and I sincerely appreciate all the discussion. I really do. And it proves once again that we're not taking any of this lightly, that we're concerned about every step of the way, and we need to be, because this is, we're talking about future of Montgomery County here. But having said that, I too believe that I'm going to stick with what I said at my vote on the joint committee, and I'm not in favor of this. I'm in favor of what the planning staff has suggested. So with that, there's a joint committee recommendation. All those in favor of the joint committee recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Rice, and Council Vice President Hucker. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Giwando, and myself. So the joint committee recommendation passes 6-3. Okay, Dr. Orland, can we move on, please?
We can. Bottom page 6, the Westfield Montgomery Mall had recommended that its area be recharacterized as an orange policy area. It's currently in the Potomac policy area now, which is yellow. And Pam, if you could bring up the map on Circle 19. What she's going to show you is a map which includes the area west of the I-270 West Spur, north of Democracy Boulevard, east of Westlake Drive, and south of the Pepco substation. This is all area that was included in the Rock Spring Master Plan that Council approved a couple years ago. Most of the Rock Spring Plan was east of 270 West Spur, but it did include these properties as well, both the Westfield property and the Orsman property just to the north of it. And there you go. And so that area that you see in purple and the sort of the light tan area just to the north of it, not to the west of it, but to the north of it, but below the yellow, that's the area we're talking about. Again, they're arguing that should be treated like the rest of the properties in the Rock Spring Master Plan, which is in the orange area. The committees, the joint committees, agreed unanimously that they were right, that it should be included there. So effectively, it would move these two parcels from, or maybe more than two parcels, those two areas, from the Potomac policy area into the North Bethesda policy area, changing its classification from yellow to orange, which would reduce their impact tax rates by 20%. And it would also change the congestion standard along those two intersections on Westlake Drive and Democracy, and Westlake Drive and Westlake Terrace to a looser congestion standard of what the same standard is in North Bethesda. And that was unanimous.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the joint committee recommendation? It was unanimous. So that is without objection. Okay.
Okay, page 7. There was a request from Jonathan Jen, representing Global Lifeside Development Corporation, that the White Oak policy area, which is now an orange policy area, be characterized as a red policy area, like the Metro Station policy areas and the Purple Line policy areas. He refers to language in the White Oak Master Plan that refers to this area as urban. However, as I pointed out, and I've actually pointed this out at the time when we did the plan in 2014, that urban didn't have anything to do with the SSP. It had to do with its characterization in the 1992 general plan update, which divided the county into 3 or 4 different zones: urban, suburban, wedge, I think one other. And it treated White Oak as part of the same general way of thinking of planning as Kensington Wheaton and Tacoma, as Silver Spring, Tacoma, and Bethesda Chevy Chase, all of which are orange. So I recommend keeping this as an orange area, not changing its status, and the Joint Committee unanimously agreed to that 5-0.
It was a 5-0 Joint Committee recommendation. Is this one okay without objection? We are not objecting, Dr. Orland. Let's move on, please.
Moving on. Okay, one of the things that the council asked the planning board to do as part of this SSP, when the council had taken up the transportation demand management bill about 1.5 years ago, was to create non-auto driver mode share goals for all those areas that didn't have them in master plans. Table 1 in your packet lists all those areas in master plans, it lists all those non-auto driver mode shares which exist in master plans, but they didn't exist in a lot of other places. And so the planning board, planning staff worked on that over the summer, and the planning board transmitted it in early September. And they're on table 2, which is on circle 22 of the packet. The Fed committee asked us to review those more carefully, and there were basically at the bottom page 8, you'll see 6 sets of recommended changes to table 2 from what the planning board recommended. I would say most of them are middling to small changes. What they do is to make sure there is a goal, either both for residential and non-residential, or a blended goal, which would look at the two together. So any kind of development would happen in those areas would have a goal. And it also looked at what was being recommended in certain areas which were further out than others. And you think that an area that's further away from the center of the region would have a somewhat lower mode share than those that are a goal than ones that are further in. So we adjusted for that. And so the committee, this is just the Fed committee now, did recommend these 6 changes to table 2. And I can go through them each individually if you'd like, but in the interest of time.
This was a unanimous vote. Councilmember Reamer.
I just want to give a quick comment here. I'm really glad to see this. We're really moving forward now on this transportation demand management approach. This is something I worked for several years on. I worked very closely with Councilmember Berliner. It was one of my top transportation priorities in the last term, and we have it really up and running now. And it's going to come into play as we proceed through this SSP, because relying upon TDM techniques is going to become a bigger factor in what we require development to do. So this proposal is essential for us to be able to set the goal that development is trying to achieve when it comes before the county for approval. And what we're doing is we're making development first look for ways to reduce the amount of vehicle generating trips rather than, trying to just solve for more cars, saying, let's talk about how we can have fewer cars and come up with operational management strategies that they have to fund or manage and or partner with the county on. So by fulfilling this, and I think while this was a committee recommendation, as I believe it represents the consensus view of everybody involved, Director Conklin has, really been essential in helping us work through all of this. It's going to fall to DOT, a huge job here. But this sets these goals all around the county. It kind of completes the map, I think, so that we can know how to proceed with development wherever it is. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? This is a committee recommendation. It was a 3-0. It was unanimous from the Fed committee. Any objection? It is without objection. Dr. Orland, please continue.
Okay, the next set of issues has to do with local area review, which is the transportation test in the subdivision staging policy. And there are 4 different tests which fall under that currently, and they've been 4 different tests since 2016. One for motor vehicle system, one for the bikeway system, one for the pedestrian system, and one for basically bus transit system. So first we talk about the motor vehicle system adequacy test. And the first issue has to do with what standards should be used in red policy areas. And I believe this is right. I think this is the last issue of all the ones that covered today. There was a split vote. I think from this point on, after this one, they're all unanimous. In any event, the recommendation that came from the planning board was that instead of using the current standard, which is 120 seconds per vehicle for the red policy areas, which is well within the failure range, it's well within F, is to basically not have the test at all, not to have a standard, to allow just congestion to happen as it happens. This is a split vote. I had recommended keeping the current standard of 120 seconds per vehicle. Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friesen concurred with the planning board. Mr. Joanno concurred with council staff. I want to point out, based on your earlier decision now, all the purple line policy areas then would also have no congestion standards. So Wayne Avenue, Manor Road, Jones Bridge Road, all the other roads that are in the zone between Silver Spring and the county line, for the most part, not all of it, but most of it, would have no congestion standard. And so that's where we are.
Mr. Conklin, please.
I don't think the standard itself has really created problems in the last few years. And it's our opinion that having a consistent set of tests that's required across the county is a benefit in terms of transparency and clarity on what our requirements are. We would strongly advocate that you retain this test in the red policy areas, particularly as we've expanded the red policy areas based on your last vote and Mr. Orland's comment, because I think we are suddenly putting a number of residential communities into a place where they don't get a review of the traffic impacts from development when we think they are due that review, even if there isn't a lot of recommendation for mitigation resulting from those. And again, as Councilmember Reamer had said more recently, or in his last comments, the first priorities for mitigating those impacts are transportation demand management and other strategies besides widening the roads. And nobody, at least in the Department of Transportation, is looking at significant road widenings in these policy areas under any circumstances. I would encourage you to reconsider the committee's recommendation on this particular note. And I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Reamer's earlier comments about the TDM legislation and highlight that a major element of that was the streamlining of the approval processes related to those TDM plans. So we're hopeful that that works hand in hand with your policy objectives to make development more attractive in this county by making that process easier for people to manage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of points. One, I think some credence should be given to committee recommendations. At the very least, we should start from the premise of why committees recommended what they did. It feels like throughout this meeting we have explained, stated what committee recommendations were, and then went straight into, staff and executive branch explaining why the committee recommendations were wrong. And it just feels like it's a bit of a perverted process and somewhat inappropriate to the way that the council is intended to function, where the committee is supposed to deliberate, decide, vote, put forward a recommendation, and then it's up to the will of the body in order to decide whether the full council wants to support that recommendation or not. And so I just hope that we move down that path a little bit more than we have up to this point. On this particular recommendation, when we talk about Vision Zero, when we talk about road safety, when we talk about the type of livable, accessible, walkable communities that we want to build, when we talk about a congestion standard, we're talking about testing predominantly for the benefit of cars. And for decades, 100 years or more, we have built communities around cars as opposed to building communities around people. And by creating red policy areas, the purpose of that is to create the type of development, the type of placemaking, the type of living environments and working environments and recreational environments to produce the type of communities that we want. And when we, in this policy, the question is, what are you testing for and what happens when you test for it? And the challenge that we have, I believe, in a red policy area is, what are we going to do when a congestion standard isn't met? And the challenge that I have is if we keep the red policy congestion standards, the tests as we are, focused on automobiles, it means that the solution is for automobiles. It's not for people. It's not for walkability and accessibility. And so the benefit here should be that we shouldn't be looking at expanding roadways in red policy areas. We shouldn't be talking about adding channelized right turns or adding turn lanes in these areas. We should be talking about urban infrastructure in the urban areas of the county. That is the basis for the planning board's recommendation. It is entirely consistent with our Vision Zero goals, with our transit-oriented development policy priorities, with the road safety standards that we've set. It's not that we won't have tests in these areas. It's that the tests will be focused on pedestrians and on bikes, and the solutions will be on lowering the non-auto driver mode share by making it more hospitable to pedestrians and more hospitable to bikes and more hospitable to the exact activity that we want to encourage in these areas, which is safely living, walking, and moving about without having to get into a car. It is a more modern approach to these issues. I understand for some, those changes are difficult to see happen, and there are many who are opposed to those types of changes. But if we want to move forward with our Vision Zero goals, if we want to create the safe, livable, walkable, accessible communities, then we need to have tests that lead to outcomes that are appropriate for the type of communities that we want to create, with the type of road infrastructure that we want to create. And in red policy areas specifically, that is not for cars, that is for people. And we need to be promoting and pushing that policy priority forward. And for that reason, as I have been previously, I strongly support the committee's recommendation here.
Sydney?
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Not to beat a dead horse, but I was under the impression you were going to come to me first as the committee chair to espouse the view of the committee where necessary. And indeed, you went to the executive branch first. So I concur with Councilmember Friedson. I thought he explained it well, but I want to just follow up. We are not saying there shall be no tests in these areas. We're saying that we're not going to worry about vehicle tests. We're going to worry about tests for pedestrians and bikes. And we are applying tests for transportation. It's just that we're not going to try to solve in these tight areas. That doesn't mean that there won't be transportation improvements as needed for traffic, for vehicle traffic. It's just that when that is needed, it's going to be on the county to figure it out over time based on how things really work out. And, we're always on the ground in these areas. We're always, getting input from the community, hearing about where there's problems, making changes. I think what we're trying to do with this proposal is say, let's stop being on autopilot about new development coming in and then putting in place all kinds of fixes that might advantage drivers and disadvantage other kinds of users, and change the footprint or the format of an area into a less urbanized area. And so we are shifting to rely on different tests. That's the philosophy of the committee's recommendation. I thought Casey and Gwen explained it well at the committee, and they could be here as well to, add to that. Casey.
Thank you. I'm going to call one in a second. But Councilmember Reamer, since you started out by saying that you were that I didn't call on you, let me apologize.
That's okay.
But you also have been texting me the whole time.
I know, exactly.
Not
That's
text
fine.
me this
I'm not
time.
mad or anything. I'm just saying
Okay.
I didn't feel as much umbrage as my colleague, Mr. Friedson, did, but I was trying to get the first word.
Okay. Well, and you certainly have gotten several. Mr. Anderson.
I wanted to tie this back to the discussion that we just had a minute ago about the red areas and the purple line. Chris had mentioned that there are transportation projects even in these intensely developed urban areas, and a lot of them relate to bikes and transit and walking. What we're proposing here is that we still test for transit, biking, and walking, and development projects, even in the red areas, will be required to build those things and to provide them where they're inadequate. They would simply not be expected to widen the roads. That's the key issue, which, as Councilmember Friedson has pointed out, is exactly what we don't want to do in these areas. Now, I know that a lot of people, and this is something that Glenn had said a minute ago, that there is an expectation that some of these residential areas are going to get traffic tests. Well, here's the thing. Those residential areas are not going to redevelop. They're already built out with single family houses. They're zoned for single family houses. None of that will change. Even if they happen to be in a red area, they will not be affected. And as Councilmember Glass had pointed out, even if they're torn down and built with a new single family house, there's no impact taxes anyway. So it doesn't matter. Those residential neighborhoods, meaning single family residential neighborhoods, are not going to be affected by this one way or the other, because nobody's widening these tertiary residential streets when a house gets torn down and replaced with a slightly bigger house. Last point I want to make is that this is already the policy in downtown Silver Spring. The SSP that existed before I even was appointed to the planning board, I think this must date to 2012, 2008, to even before then, was the intersections in downtown Silver Spring. The SSP has long said that no matter what happens to traffic congestion, we're not going to widen the intersections in downtown Silver Spring. And you'll recall there was a lot of controversy about that in the old days when people were arguing about whether and how Silver Spring should redevelop. There was even a Silver Spring Traffic Coalition that predicted there would be total catastrophe if redevelopment of downtown Silver Spring were allowed, because we'd all be choking in traffic. Well, downtown Silver Spring redeveloped. None of the intersections are widened. Colesville and Georgia are still the same number of lanes that they were when I moved here 20 some years ago. And guess what? It's not a big deal. The world didn't end. And in fact, the refusal, the decision by this council to recognize that it would be a bad idea to widen those roads has been vindicated, because the last thing we would want at the intersection of Georgia and Colesville is 2 left turn lanes with another couple lanes added for right turns at the light so people could make hot rights in the downtown. We're trying to lay the groundwork for a policy that creates great places, especially great urban places. And this policy should recognize that the last thing we want to do is widen the roads. That's all this decision is about.
Okay. Councilmember Rice.
So I'm going to pick up right where Chair Anderson left off, because many people know that I'm a car guy. I'm very supportive of us continuing to ensure, especially in areas in the Up County, that we can make sure that cars move through, because we don't have access to transportation. But I will say that at the same time, the challenge is, if you make it easier for cars, there will be more cars. And so I do agree. It's one of those where I have to agree with the planning board chair and just say, look, if you do continue to create instances in which your reliance upon cars and their expeditious traveling through intersections and getting around is going to be easier, you're not going to encourage people to use other modes of transportation. All you're going to do is continue to make it so that that becomes the norm. And I will just say this, that we continue to have challenges in areas like Germantown, where we've decided to try and make the lanes tighter to reduce the speed limit, because we had so many pedestrian issues and issues of continued supportive walkability in a community that truly can be a walkable community. The problem is that we've designed it so to support cars so much that it makes it hard to balance between the two of them. And then we have to expend so much money and so much effort to actually create that blended community like we were talking about before. So from that perspective, I'm going to shock people here. I actually agree. I agree with the majority of the committee and think that that's the right way to go if we are serious about Vision Zero and trying to achieve our goals.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is opposites day here, Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright. just Director Con, I mean, look, again, I'll just say all for the goals. I think the thing that we haven't discussed yet, and I want to make sure we bring in, is the umps, or the non-existent umps, because isn't this where we talked about this, right? That as a potential mitigating factor, but that hasn't come online. Because I think, again, this is being painted as like you're for pedestrian safety, or you think cars should be going on two wheels through downtown Silver Spring. So I think let's just get a little more nuance into the conversation. Dr. Conklin, could you talk about the umps and their goal and how that how that would factor into this overall effort?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And, you know, there are no umps funded for development at this time. So that's part of the challenge we're talking about here. But the umps are intended to be
Explain what umps are, please.
Unified Mobility Program.
I appreciate that. There are some people that don't know that. Yes. Go ahead.
I apologize for that. In that program, there's a comprehensive assessment of what investment needs are to meet the LATR requirements, which are the things we're talking about today, these various tests. This program was essentially piloted in the White Oak area and is in place. It's in a draft form in Bethesda, but has not yet been transmitted or adopted. There's one piece of technical information that's still needed for us to do that. And what that would do is set a payment in lieu scheme, essentially, so that a development would be complying with the LATR requirements by making, I'll call it an adequate facilities payment, and that the improvements would then be implemented in a coordinated way by the county. That's a model that was set up in the last SSP. And I did want to respond on the test. The value of the test is the data and performance characteristics are not routinely collected by us as development occurs, and this is a way to do that. And when you get to number 8 in the agenda today, you're talking about mitigation priorities. And nobody is suggesting that the answer to not meeting the standard is to make hostile roads to pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users. And you'll see in that priority, the first priority is transportation demand management. The second priority that was proposed, although it's a little bit different in the recommendation, was operational changes that are within the footprint of that road, and actually adding capacity in the traditional sense of lanes was the last priority in that. And that's consistent with the way that we approach these projects. And it allowed a payment in lieu if you couldn't meet that requirement, so that that resource was available to implement other projects in that priority sequence within that policy or adjacent ones. And I just think it's important for us to know the implications of the decision. And I have no problem making a decision to not fix a capacity problem, as long as we know that that's the decision we've made and we have the resources to address that through other means. And that's what I think keeping this does. So a little bit more than what you asked, but I wanted to add that because I had that on the list and now I don't need to be separately.
I appreciate it. You actually telegraphed, you anticipated my next question, which was going to be about the data. I remember we discussed this in committee, knowing what's happening at intersections and having that be done at the time of development and how it might impact is equally as important as keeping people safe and knowing you. And again, as you said, the bottom priority is road widening, which again, none of us want, but we want to have the information. I also think, and I brought this up before, that we all want to have more walkable, livable, transit-oriented communities. Montgomery County is a great place, and we're making leaps and bounds. I was very happy that we did Vision Zero and implemented it and made it the core of the Bearsville Master Plan in committee. But we also have to understand that many people drive and will continue to do so throughout our county, and I think that we want to understand the implications of that, I understand that if you will build it and you constrict it and you'll change it to what you want it to be, I think that's right. And so we want to design our roads in a way that are more compact, lower the speed limits, make sure that we build complete streets, all of that. But I think we do want to have this information and realizing the reality of the situation of what's happening and where people are passing through from more suburban areas to our red policy and kind of downtowns and back and forth, which I think is going to continue for a while. So I just think that's for that reason, I think keeping the current test and getting the information is an important feature of this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Auburn.
Thanks. Again, another really important discussion. And I guess for me, this isn't a binary issue either. And I think that nuance that Director Conklin just mentioned with the development of the UMPs as you know, in the future and in the next phase, I think is important. I think having the data collection that reflects and helps us better plan within those areas and better understand all the complex angles related to transit, I think are important. And I'll just note that, you know, I think clearly over time, we need to begin to promote and ensure that we are focusing on transit solutions and smart growth. I've been consistent on that throughout this and many other policy areas. But in this instance, outright eliminating this test, I think, especially now through a transition, where as Councilmember Jawando noted, there are still a number of cars on our streets. And over time, I think that we will start to see them subside, but that's not going to happen within the next 4 years when we will be taking this up again. And I'll just note that the congestion that exists within our urban areas doesn't go away. But because of Waze and Google Maps, and I'm experiencing this in my community, we have seen a huge uptick in the number of cars passing through residential areas to avoid those congestion areas. And, you know, that's something that I know we're tackling in a number of communities across the county. And so I think outright eliminating this test at this time would be a mistake. And so I don't support this particular committee recommendation and agree with DOT and the council staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. That was the last speaker that I have on the list. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. I was wondering if we could maybe hear from Gwen Wright about how, you know, how this is experienced by the community and what some of the concerns are, because I think this comes also out of some practical, you know, experiences. And I thought this was one where Director Conklin, you know, made an interesting comment about the tests, and you know, it's an issue that I think is very front and center here. So,
yeah, if I could just comment, we love data. I think we are one of the most, along with DOT, data-oriented agencies you can imagine. But collecting data in the context of a specific development application sets an expectation for the community that something is going to be done with it, that something is going to happen. So this data just doesn't come in willy-nilly. It comes in when a specific development application is filed and the developer is asked to do a traffic study and provide information. And if that traffic study shows that the congestion is going to be really bad, the community doesn't accept the idea that, well, thank you, that's really good information for us to have, but we aren't going to do anything about it. We aren't going to widen the road. We aren't going to add a turn lane. We aren't going to do X, Y, and Z. So I think, you know, again, it sends a really mixed message to the community that you're saying, again, not in the context of developing an or in the context of doing a master plan, where we do think we should be doing traffic studies and looking at the big picture. But when you're doing it with a development application and you're saying this is a test, that's what LATR is a test. And you get the results of the test, and then you say, thank you, but we aren't going to do anything about it. That's a very frustrating situation for community members who are following a particular development application. I think we should have additional information about congestion, about traffic within all the different parts of the county. But I just want to emphasize this is done in a specific context, which is a development application, and you're testing that application. But then you're saying, but we won't do anything about it.
Because this is just in
That's
those
very difficult.
policy areas. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I have no other speakers at this point. There is a committee recommendation. All those in favor of the committee recommendation, please raise your hand. That is Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Rice, and Vice President Hucker, and me. All those not in favor, all those against the committee recommendation, Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Armanos. So it passes 7-2. Dr.
Okay.
Orland, please.
Next issue is relatively technical. It has to do with which methodology to use for traffic tests. And so obviously that would apply just in orange and yellow and green areas. Right now, there's a test called the critical lane volume test, which is a sort of a sketch test that's done very quickly. And it is used to see whether or not an intersection passes is more congested than a certain amount, which is not very congested. It's 1,350 critical lane volume is the actual term. If it's beyond that, then the direction is they have to use a more robust test called the highway capacity manual test, which also takes more data and is likely to give you more precise result, but is also more time consuming. The planning board had recommended changing the threshold from when you do critical lane volume tests, the highway capacity manual test, so that if you reach the point, if your critical lane volume test only got to the point of the congestion standard for that area, then that was okay. But if it went beyond that, you'd have to use the highway capacity manual test. And I think it was a way of essentially trying to reduce the burden on development applications to go through the more robust test. The point, though, that we made at the staff was, though, that there are a lot of false positives with the critical lane volume test. It might show, the test might show that there's not a problem when, in fact, when you do the more robust test, you find that there is a problem. So there's not that safety measure. And so the committee unanimously, this is Fed committee, did unanimously recommend not making a change here, keeping the way we do the tests now.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer, did you want to comment?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can keep moving, but this is a very technical issue. We've taken different approaches over the years. I think what we've got here is just fine.
Okay. It was a unanimous decision of the committee. Is that without objection? All right, we are not objecting. Please, next.
Okay, top of page 12, the planning board had recommended creating a new congestion standard for intersections along planned BRT corridors. They'd recommended 100 seconds per vehicle, and that would be on all planned BRT corridors, so Rockville Pike, Frederick Avenue, Wisconsin Avenue, and US 29, Colesville Road, Viersmill Road already has 100 seconds per vehicle because of the Viersmill Road Master Plan, Georgia Avenue, and several others. The committee agreed with staff, however, that it was premature to do this because none of those BRT lines are funded for construction. The only one that was funded for construction and open is the flash service on US 29, which arguably really isn't full-blown BRT. There is some separate lane for BRT in the Fairland area, but south of there, White Oak down through Silver Spring, it's not. So I have some other information here as well, but basically the committee's unanimous recommendation is to not apply the 100 seconds per vehicle delay standard to planned BRT corridors.
Okay, Councilmember Reamer.
I think we keep moving. Thank you.
Okay, is that without objection? All right, we're keeping and moving. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm going to spend a little time on this next one because the format for the bicycle system adequacy test is pretty much the same as for the bus transit test and for the pedestrian test. The planning board had recommended tightening this test, requiring more of developers from this. And there was a lot of discussion about this in the initial work session at the Fed committee. And frankly, at the end, the Fed committee asked the staffs, the planning staff, council staff, DOT staff, to try to come up with a consensus recommendation. And we did, which is what is in bold print starting at the bottom page 13 and on most half of page 14, and the committee unanimously agreed with it. What it basically does is it says that in red and orange policy areas, that depending on how large your development is in terms of peak hour person trips that are generated, you are going to be required to do more work. The best way I can explain this is just give you an example. I think if you look on page 14, look at the table. If you have a development which generates 150 peak hour person trips, then you'd be required to make sure that the bikeway facilities that are master planned within 750 feet of that development in all directions is brought up to what is the standard in the bicycle master plan, which is what's either called a level of traffic stress 1 or 2, 1 being very comfortable, 2 being comfortable. In yellow and green areas, we had the same idea, but the idea there is that the propensity for biking is less, and so the requirement on the developers should be somewhat less. But it's still good. It's graduated. The smaller developments do less, the larger developments do more, according to this table. And then if there's a situation where within that requirement, there is a piece of it that both DOT and the planning board agree are not practicable, not feasible for any one of a number of reasons, maybe because of the right-of-way is not available or because there's some impenetrable obstacle to doing something, then they can instead require a mitigation payment, which is reasonably related to what the cost would have been of building that bikeway. And DOT can use those funds on other basically bicycle master plan improvements of that standard, comfortable, very comfortable or comfortable, within the same policy area. Or if they're in one of these small policy areas like the red policy areas or the 3 small orange town center policy areas, literally Burtonsville, Clarksburg Town Center, and Germantown Town Center. In that case, those areas are so small there may not be an alternative place to spend that money, and so this test would allow DOT to spend that money in an adjacent policy area, which is usually the larger policy area around it. And then in the very odd chance where there's a mitigation payment made and DOT can't find a project either in that policy area or in the case of the small one, adjacent policy area, then if the applicant agrees, it can be spent somewhere else entirely. That's likely to be rare, but DOT wanted that flexibility, and the council and the committee recommended it. So that's that was a unanimous recommendation of the committee.
Thank you. Just want to really say this is building on such an important body of work from the planning board and the planning staff. First of all, the entire bicycle master plan, building a framework that could be integrated subsequently into future development. That was a big project, and now that we have that foundation laid, we have a way to have development, held accountable to build it. And so, related to our earlier conversation about trying to develop better, stronger, more effective tests for pedestrians and bicyclists, here we have the bike function. I appreciate the effort that went into making consensus. To my colleagues, don't never say I never did anything for you. It would have been tough to litigate these things on the before the body. But we got everybody around the table, and they came up with a framework that I think everyone was pretty comfortable with. I would appreciate if we could hear from the planning board or staff on this, whoever appropriately wants to, just share some reflections. But this is a good step forward for us, and I commend
And
it.
I'd like to hear from anybody that wants to say that Hans never did anything for me.
Oh, it's been said.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. I'm sorry I said it. No, go ahead, please. Planning board, please.
So I don't know if there's really much that we need to add. I think that, it was a very collaborative effort that we undertook to come to agreement on this, but not just this one, but also the subsequent ones that we're going to be talking about, the transit test and the pedestrian test. And we appreciate the effort both with DOT and with council staff on working through that. We think we have a pretty good set of tests here that will help ensure that we have a multimodal the multimodal transportation network that we want to produce throughout the county. So,
Okay, and this was unanimous.
There's an expression or an aphorism that what gets measured gets done. And so the fact that we have the world's best bicycle master plan is fantastic, but without tests that get applied to actually compel something to be done, the plans don't mean anything. So I think this is really great step forward.
Sounds good. Is that by consensus without objection? Thank you. Just so, and before, as we move on, let me ask Dr. Orland. We're at 4 o'clock. I'm fine to keep going, but I don't know where my colleagues are on keeping going. Is there a certain time that we want to say that we're going to end this today?
I would suggest 5 o'clock hard stop, but
5 o'clock, is that okay with everybody? I haven't seen any. Some people just fainted, but it's fine. It's 5 o'clock, okay? Yeah, okay. Yeah, 5 o'clock is what we're going to do. Okay, go ahead, please, Dr. Orland.
Sure. The next test is the transit system adequacy test, which is really a bus system adequacy test. And if you go to skip to the actual recommendation, the bottom page 15, top page 16, you see it follows the same structure, but instead of talking about bikeways, we're really talking about bus shelters. And it requires that not only bus shelters, but also real-time travel information within the bus shelters and sidewalk connections where they don't exist to these bus shelters all be provided. And in some certain locations, also crosswalk improvements to get to the shelters. And you see the structure the same way. It's graduated by size of the development. You're required more if you're bigger. And if you're in a yellow policy area, you don't have to do as much if you're in the red or the orange. In this case, we did not apply it to the green policy areas at all because there's very little transit in the green policy areas. So it didn't seem worthwhile to actually have a test there. And same thing in terms of, for some reason, there is a problem with not being able to provide, for feasibility purposes, the bus shelter or the other amenities that go with it. Then it does allow, again, for a mitigation payment, and same kind of rules. It could be used for other improvements in the same policy area or adjacent policy area if it's a small policy area. Or, and again, in the rear case, that doesn't work, it could be applied somewhere else entirely. And that was unanimous again.
If I could just make one comment on this, I apologize for interrupting.
Go ahead.
This is a very substantial improvement over the past test, which required all kinds of unproductive analysis by applicants. This is really focused on the transit supportive infrastructure that's needed rather than how many seats are open on a bus. So I really hope that you adopt this test.
thank you. Just wanted to say, this is how you move an ocean liner, 1 degree at a time. I think really we've built a very strong policy framework with these sets of tests, and appreciate the planning board bringing them forward, and to my colleagues for supporting. I think we've come to a really good place here. And thank you, Director Conklin.
Okay, is that, yes, Councilmember Rice? You wanted to find out how you move an ocean liner?
Well, I was going to text you, but then I thought maybe it's quicker to just raise my hand.
Yeah, it is. If I look up, yeah.
there it is. Let me just thank Director Conklin, and just a very quick story that bus shelter along Clopper Road. He'll remember what I'm talking about, that my office worked with at the corner of Metz and Clopper, 117. That was a huge concern, that actually, from a pedestrian safety standpoint, as well as to increase rideability, because there were folks who weren't going to ride on because it was too unsafe to actually walk down Clopper Road where there is no sidewalk to be able to try and access the ride-on bus stop. And all of this, this made a tremendous difference, not just from a safety standpoint, but in terms of increased ridership. I used to drive that way every single night on the way home, and it just makes a tremendous deal. So thank you for all of your great work and following up on these things that are making a difference and truly delivering on ensuring that people are able to access our ride-on bus service. So thank you.
And let me just say, just very quickly, as many times as I've driven past that bus stop, I have often said, how in the world do people get there? It's not safe. And there's a lot of people that use it. So, yeah, no, good point. All right, so we're without objection on this one. Yes? Okay, please.
Okay, the next test is the pedestrian system adequacy test. And this is a big change also from the current test. The proposal starts with a new methodology called the pedestrian level of comfort methodology, where the Fed committee set aside most of a work session just on understanding what this methodology is. It's actually in your packet. It's 25 pages. If you're not on the committee, you want to read it, but it's mixed for excellent reading. It's a very comprehensive, very complex rating system, scoring system, looking at all locations in the county where there would be a sidewalk or not, or whether pedestrians can walk, and is it comfortable and very comfortable, somewhat uncomfortable, or unacceptable, or undesirable, actually. The DOT staff and myself reviewed a draft of that methodology with Eli Glazier, who's the lead person for the park and planning for this technology, for this methodology, as well as for the pedestrian master plan, which will be coming to a council near you in about a year and a half. And there were some changes that were made, but there were more of the middling or small variety, but important ones nonetheless. And so, again, the test here is similar to the other two tests in terms of how it's structured. But what's required here is to make sure that two things. First of all, there's a sidewalk which is either very comfortable or comfortable within those walk sheds of these developments, but also street lighting. This is a new element to this test. Let's make sure there's adequate street lighting in those same sections. So this is a requirement. ADA compliance is also required, although to a lesser span of walk shed than the sidewalk and street lighting, primarily because for ADA improvements, they often can be extraordinarily expensive. Depends if there's an underground vault. There may be all kinds of other things that are just in the way, which make it very, very difficult. So we thought the scope of that, geographic scope of what the developer is required to do should be somewhat less. And then again, like the other tests, it has the alternative that if for some part of this developer can't do, if the planning board and the DOT agrees they can't do because it's not feasible, they would make a mitigation payment with all the same kind of conditions on how to use that money, as we mentioned in the other two. I should say the couple other changes to this test. One is that the original test would apply to anything within these ranges. However, we felt that it should not apply on secondary or tertiary residential streets. Many of them really don't need sidewalks as much as others because maybe the volume of traffic is very low and the speed of traffic is very low, perhaps because there's only one lane, perhaps because it's a speed hump, because there's a sidewalk on the other side of the street. But probably the thing that's stuck in our minds more than anything else is some of the worst neighbor-on-neighbor fights that we have is over sidewalks. Someone will want a sidewalk, but they'll want it on the other side of the street, and there's really sort of very, very difficult intra-neighborhood disagreements. So I'll just leave it at that over this kind of thing. And while we shouldn't shy away from providing pedestrian facilities when they're really needed, the idea here is do you really put the developer in the middle of that? And so this test would not apply to secondary or tertiary residential streets. Although primary residential streets, which are still going through neighborhoods, the collective streets neighborhoods, it still would apply there. It also wouldn't apply to crosswalks, because this test applies not just to pedestrian sidewalks, but also to crosswalks. Wouldn't apply to crosswalks which cross interstate ramps. Those are some of our most difficult situations. And the thought here is twofold. One is those are entirely on the state system anyway. And so we don't really have final say over that. But secondly, depending on what you do there, it could cause a real safety problem for motor vehicles as well in terms of backups on those ramps. So they're excluded from the test. But other than that, it follows the same kind of form as the transit test and the bicycle test you saw before this.
Thank you. Can I,
Go ahead, Councilmember Green.
Well, this is just an exciting proposal. I think it's showing that people who are walking are finally getting their due in this county. That choice of transportation is finally getting respect and recognition, and then subsequently, infrastructure. I know we often all see places in the county that are very inhospitable to walking, and nobody walks there. And it's just this vicious cycle. Like, no one's going to walk there until it is more hospitable to walking. Well, we're trying to change that. We try to change that with our capital budget. We also have to try to change it with development. So when a project comes in, you can't have a big development coming in and then being blind to the changes that are needed in the area to make it walkable. And I think this policy, I really want to compliment the planning board and the planning staff. This is going to win awards. I just know it. And we're going to be taking on the pedestrian master plan, subsequently. They're doing a terrific job building that now, but being able to apply it early on now through the SSP so that new development is held accountable for these standards. I think that's what the community is looking for. I think it has been, a missing piece for a long time. And I think we're going to make a lot of people really happy. And I think we can all really be proud of this. So, terrific proposal. Again, thanks for coming together around a timely application, devising an approach that we can adopt now. And thanks to the committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Yeah, I too am really excited about this proposal and want to commend the planning board and staff for their forward thinking and in this effort. Ensuring that we have comfortable sidewalks is so important, and making sure that existing sidewalks on busy roads that tend to be dangerous and hostile, as Chair Raymer just noted, making sure that they are more welcoming. And then also, notably, as was mentioned, I think the lighting adequacy analysis, we need to put a spotlight on that, on the pedestrian access, and that does exactly that, making sure that people can be seen. And we know that is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to pedestrian safety. And for as often as I might think it's not fair to put the onus necessarily on a pedestrian for wearing certain types of clothes. We don't really criticize people for the clothes that they wear, but by having more lights on the street, they can be seen regardless of the clothing that they might be wearing. And so I'm really glad to see these standards added to the SSP, and again, commend planning board and staff for this initiative.
You didn't just say we need to put a spotlight on the lighting analysis, did you?
You might have been the only one listening to me, so thank you, and I apologize.
Yeah, an apology accepted. Yeah, not a problem. Councilmember Albernaz, please.
Thanks. This recommendation is consistent with the age-friendly designation that the county pursued several years ago. So I do think it's terrific on a number of different levels. But Dr. Orlin, if you could go back to something you said about ADA accessibility and how that's impacted by this. And because I want to make sure I heard you right.
The recommendation from the staffs and the committee is that you see those numbers in the table. The requirement for ADA would be half those. So, for example, if it's 150 peak hour person trips and you're in an orange policy area, you're required to take care of everything within 750 feet. For ADA, it would be within 375 feet. Is the proposal.
you explain why.
I could add.
Go ahead, Chris. Did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, the expectation is that anything that's built new as a result of these requirements will comply in full with the ADA. But when we get to assessing existing infrastructure, usually the trigger for that is a substantial rehabilitation or reconstruction of the road along which these facilities are. And the nexus to the development is not quite as strong. And we could be asking for extraordinary investment that's a little bit beyond what would be reasonably tied to the development itself. So we experienced this over the last 4 years with the current ADA test and developed some workable provisions with the planning board and department to make this workable. And this essentially reflects the way we've dealt with it for the last 4 years. But the intention is for anything that is built in response to the SSP requirements that it's fully compliant. But we're limiting the responsibility to fix existing deficiencies that are well beyond, several hundred feet beyond the specific frontage of a project.
Okay, I mean, I agree with you in principle. We've all received, passionate testimony from our disability community regarding a number of the very progressive projects that we've put forward to make smart growth decisions that in some cases have the unintended consequence of very disproportionately impacting our disability community. And that has been especially true with bike lanes, which I know we are trying to mitigate and work through. But I think that it's important that we see all of these projects through that lens. And so I think that it would be good for us to explain that to our Disability Commission or others, just to make sure that they understand that there is another test, there is another process by which we will be ensuring that the county holds the highest possible standards for the walkability and the accessibility of all of our communities. I think it's inherent in trying to widen the sidewalks, which is consistent with serving our disability community on so many different levels. And so I just want to make sure that's not lost in the shuffle here. It's an important point that I know matters deeply to a lot of people in our community.
Yeah, understood.
Thank you. Councilmember Raymer.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on that point because, when we had this discussion at committee, I thought to myself, someone watching from the outside could come away from this discussion and perhaps not, unless it was explained the way that it really is, it might seem that it's less of a step forward than it is. And I received the testimony from the Commission on People with Disabilities. I think the night before, actually, we took this up. They were commenting in general on the SSP. And I was really very happy to be able to send to Ms. Luking the recommendation in the SSP. This is the first time that pedestrian safety has really been a priority at this level, ever. And we pushed it as far as we could with the ADA requirement. But as Director Conklin said, if you were to mandate, all sidewalks or all infrastructure within 750 feet be up to ADA standard, that would just be, that's the county's responsibility. That's where the county has to step in, is that kind of gap between where this policy, as far as we can take any one development project, and then a further reach around it. But first of all, anything that's built must be to ADA, but this is going beyond the immediate vicinity of the land owned by the developer and saying, you got to do ADA, around you too. That's a huge step forward. And then even beyond that, you have to do pedestrian improvements, even if they may not be bringing everything up to ADA standard. So there's kind of two levels of application here. I think both of them are a huge step forward from our goal, for our goal of improving access for people with disabilities and for people who walk.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So I'm going to echo some of the same concerns that Councilmember Albornoz had, and just share with you guys. I don't know how much time I've spent a lot of time analyzing ADA. ADA is not actually really up to par with what the needs of our people with differing abilities are for this current time. I will share with you that there's been a lot of talk around creating new standards, and there's been a push, a nationwide push, to update the ADA standards. So again, if we are to be at the forefront, we've got to go well beyond what ADA, because ADA is really a very low baseline that really, quite honestly, really doesn't even serve our community like they deserve to be. And so, Councilmember Albornoz, maybe you and I, it's not appropriate for where we are right now, but I think that you and I may need to look at, and maybe we just do it under the auspices of Health and Human Services Committee, but we really need to start looking at some of the standards that we have in the county when it comes to this. So thank you for reminding me, because I've had a number of folks in the community that have continued to bring this up. And I know that Park and Planning knows all too well, because I know they've exceeded ADA standards in a lot of their projects that they do in our own parks, because those ADA standards weren't enough to really do what we needed to providing accessibility for our communities with people with differing abilities. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. And so I just hope that we'll come back to this in a much larger framework outside of the SSB.
Just to follow up on that really quickly, I think it would be really cool if you know, that could be a joint committee session as well, because it crosses over into transportation and environment as well as Fed. And I know it's on the top of mind of a lot of folks. So there may be a tri-committee session, which I think would cover most of us. But I totally agree with this planning board recommendation. But just acknowledging, as you mentioned, Chairman Reamer, that the county is going to have to step up to meet that delta. And so we want to make sure that we are putting the places in place to make sure we meet that delta. So anyways, defer back to you, Mr. President. Thanks. And thank you very much, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you. That was a unanimous decision. Is that without objection? Without objection. Dr. Orland.
I don't think this is going to change anything, but there was one additional aspect that I neglected to mention in this test, which, although I mentioned that the developer would have to do everything within the walk shed that's in that chart, that isn't already brought up to the level of comfort. But there was a concern raised from the development community that might be way too much too long a section of sidewalk and street lighting to do. So in addition to that, though, there is a limit on how much total sidewalk and street lighting would be required, and it's 4 times the number that's in that chart. So in the example I gave, 150 peak hour person trips in the red and orange area, although the developer is supposed to take care of everything within 750 feet that isn't already brought up to snuff, snuff being very comfortable or comfortable, pedestrian level of comfort, he or she's only required to provide would be 3,000 feet length of that. So 4 times 750 is 3,000 feet. Just want to make sure you understood that. Okay, the next test is top page 19, the safety system adequacy test. This would be a 5th LATR test. This would be based on a predictive safety analysis, which is still under development by the planning board, and the committee felt that it was really premature to take this up. Instead, it was a 2-0 vote, because this is a meeting that Mr. Jawando had to leave early, where Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friedson recommended not including the safety system of adequacy test in the SSP now, but to do an SSP amendment next summer or fall when it's finished, strictly on this one point, when that analysis is finished, and there can be full public understanding of what that is and reaction to it. And DOT had some initial issues with what had been proposed to date, and this would allow for a more full discussion of that. So it wouldn't be delayed 4 years, it would eventually be delayed about 7 or 8 months.
Sure. Any objection to that? Let's move on, please.
Okay, Vision Zero's impact statement. The committee unanimously recommended that there should be one for LATR studies that generate 50 or more peak hour trips, and statement that must assess and propose solutions such as the highway engineering network and safety issues, review traffic speeds, describe in detail how safe site access will be provided. With concurrence of the responsible agency, in this case either DOT or State Highway Administration, projects must be implemented or contribute to the implementation of safety countermeasures. And that was unanimous.
Thanks. We appreciate the work that went into just massage this a little bit. It's a little bit different from what the planning board recommended, but I think it's very workable, and I'm glad the planning board recommended making this a bigger priority. So we strongly support that.
So without objection? Without objection.
Okay, bottom page 20, top page 21, the recommendation from the planning board was to basically require developers, as they're doing the traffic studies, if they in their field see information that would affect any of the planning tools that the planning board or DOT has, that they report them to them so those databases can be updated. And this applies not just for the bicycle master plan or the pedestrian level of comfort map or the stress map for bicycling, but also for roadway improvements and for bus transit as well. If there's something in the field which they see which is not in our database, they should report that, and our databases would be updated.
So integrating Vision Zero more into the development process.
Correct.
Very good.
Is that without objection?
Okay. The next one, we had a lot of discussion of this, and there's some reference to this about an hour ago. We were talking about the motor vehicle test, and this has to do with the mitigation priorities. I won't talk about how we got there. It took a while to get there, but where it ended up was that in now that you don't have a test in the red areas, in the orange, yellow, and green policy areas, that if you fail the local air review standard, the first priority is TDM, Transportation Demand Management. And then if that doesn't take care of the whole problem, then the second is to do operational improvements in intersections. Mr. Conklin explained them earlier. These are improvements which don't involve any construction at the intersections. It's things like retiming the traffic signals. It's dynamic lane assignment. A perfect example of that is Rockville Pike at Jones Bridge Road, where if you're head southbound in the evening, there are actually 2 left lanes, but the other times during the day, it's only 1 left lane. The other lane is a through lane, that sort of thing. And there are other things of that sort. And if either of those 2 things fail or don't do enough to take care of the standard, then you can go to road construction, whether that's adding a through lane or a turn lane or more than that at an intersection, as long as it doesn't harm safety. And if that's the case, then you can do intersection improvement or at that location. And it still again allows for the alternative of paying a mitigation payment if all of the above is not technically feasible. For example, if you fail the safety part of that, then the money would be collected and spent on another type of improvement like this, either TDM or operational improvements or another road improvement elsewhere in the policy area, or again, the worst case scenario, somewhere else completely.
We spent a lot of time on this one.
Yeah, we did.
Might have been hours. I don't know. It's a big one. I mean, this is a very difficult issue that has a lot of consequences, and we were trying to make some policy shifts here. And I think the planning board gave us a really strong framework. Again, we just kind of worked on it a little bit and devised a real consensus approach. So, I don't know. I think I'd like to ask Director Conklin if he could explain this again, because he has a good way with words. But just in case any of my colleagues, want to ask a question, it's a very dense situation. Right? It's a dense issue, but this represents a really important step forward.
Sure. I mean, in the areas where this motor vehicle test would be required, so orange through green, there are different standards for the performance of those intersections. If an intersection isn't meeting that performance standard related to the amount of vehicle delay or critical lane volume, whatever the measure is in those different areas, then mitigation is required. And what it prioritizes for the mitigation is first that all TDM opportunities have been exhausted. And then if that still isn't allowing the intersection to meet that performance requirement, that we look to ways to change the way the existing infrastructure is operated. So Glenn gave some examples of that. Changing lane assignments, changing traffic signal phasing, those types of operational adjustments. If that is not sufficient, then we do look to make those capacity enhancements or expanding the capacity of the intersection, but we would not do that if that is creating additional safety concerns at the location. And that would be one of the conditions in which the applicant would be required to make a payment in lieu of making the improvement, because the improvement is something we don't desire because of a negative safety outcome from that improvement. And then we would use that money to either make a similar improvement elsewhere, to make an operational change elsewhere, to expand transportation demand management more broadly than what one applicant could do. So I think this was a good solution, and then it has the same framework as the other tests in terms of if for some reason the agencies in planning don't think that improvement is desirable, then the money is used for another more desirable purpose in that same area, so that that area benefits from the investment.
Okay. I don't know if council members are interested in getting these, or if you want us to just keep whisking through. I tend to like getting an explanation of what I'm voting on. So that's why I'm making sure we articulate this a couple times. So,
as you know, no one is shy. If they would like it, believe me, and wherever you would like it, please speak up. But this was a unanimous vote. So
Yes.
Without objection? Okay.
Okay. Next up, turn over to Mr. Reamer. He had a proposal for exempting biohealth facilities from all these local area review requirements for a temporary period. Did you want to talk about it, Mr. Reamer?
I do. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate my colleagues for their support of this recommendation at the committee. Montgomery County we've had some bad news over the recent years about economic growth. In the year before COVID, we had among the region's weakest job creation numbers. We have to make changes, and I think we all recognize that. We're trying to make changes in lots of different ways. There is good news, though. This county is really positioned to capture the benefit of being the epicenter of the COVID response. We have so many companies that are getting investment flowing in, or potentially getting investment flowing in for vaccine and therapeutic and diagnostic work. And we can take advantage of that. We need to seize the moment, seize the day. One of the big problems that we have is that Frederick or jurisdiction in North Carolina or any of our competitors can sit down with a company and they can assure them that from beginning to end, they'll get through the process in a couple months. We hear from industry experts at Montgomery County, the timeline is 16 to 18 months for a typical project. And there have been major facilities that have landed elsewhere. And as we all know, there's a tremendous urgency now to move quickly, especially in the biosector. When you have a 10-year patent on something, you got to start making it happen right away. If you're responding to the COVID emergency, you got to start making it happen right away. So what we're trying to do here is remove one barrier, which is these LATR tests for bioscience facilities. Let's let the county partner with the developer. If there is a transportation issue, the county can figure that out. But let's see if we can remove a certain amount of the time that it takes to go through the process. Frankly, we need to do a lot more than this to be able to confidently project outward to the industry that this is a community where they can make it happen in a timely manner. But this is one step that we could take that I think will certainly help. So the recommendation is we don't apply LATR for the next 4 years to bioscience facilities. And then if there is a traffic issue, the county can analyze that and resolve it itself. So that's the recommendation from the committee.
And I applaud it. I think that makes a lot of sense, but I do think it needs to be noted that it's the impact tax definition of a bioscience facility. So just because someone says they're in that line of work, I mean, there is a definition involved with it.
There is indeed.
I support it, and it's been, and so.
We should note, as you know well, the Novavax that just landed, Gaithersburg can take them through that process in a very short amount of time.
Well, and of course, we go back to MedImmune, where it became the 4th largest biotech in the world and made a profit, and then was bought by AstraZeneca. So anyhow, at any rate, this was unanimous. Is this without objection? Without objection, please.
Okay, and this, I think Mr. Rimmer did mention that this is a 4-year temporary exemption, and it would be sunset after 4 years, but you could take it up to the next SSP. You may want to extend it.
Yep.
The next is an amendment to the transportation impact tax credit provision. I'm going to let Chris explain the background on this, but basically it just more closely defines what the meaning of capacity is for road improvement. And I do want to make a correction in my packet. This was a unanimous committee recommendation, but it was the GO committee, not the Fed committee. So credit where credit is due. It's the GO committee unanimous recommendation. So Chris, could you?
I was wondering how I was going to explain this one.
I won't spend too long on this, but I'll try to make the explanation pretty simple. The definitions of capacity improvement were ambiguous in the current law, where you could widen a road without adding lanes or bike lanes, facilities that provide capacity, and still be eligible for the impact tax credit. And what this does is it removes that ambiguity to say that you really need to be adding a lane in order to get credit for widening the road. We had a case that we lost in tax court where a road was widened without adding any lanes. And we lost about a $5 million impact tax case on that. And it was really about the ambiguity in this definition, whether widening a road is creating more capacity or not. It doesn't change that impact taxes are still eligible for bike facilities, for sidewalk connectors, for bike lanes, for BRT or any of those things. It's just clearing up that widening versus adding capacity question.
Councilmember Navarro, did you want to comment?
I do not. I think Mr. Director Conklin did a very good job, and I think some colleagues may remember that this definitely was an issue a while back, and the committee has a recommendation. So that's all I have to say.
Very good. Councilmember Reamer, you wanted to comment?
I wanted to ask Casey Anderson or Gwen for a comment. Casey's screen has gone black. I'm not sure what that means, but
There he is.
there you go. Casey?
Sorry, I had to take a little break there. What was the question?
Oh,
Sorry.
this is the issue of facilities needing to expand in order to get impact tax credit. Need to add
Expanded capacity.
lane capacity. The GO committee recommendation was presented, which is a unanimous committee recommendation, as you probably know.
Yeah, I think as we move towards a situation where we have more infill and redevelopment, more and more of the transportation related improvements are not going to add capacity, but they're still necessary. And most of the things that add capacity are things like lane widenings. Some of them are bicycle or pedestrian related, but we often find in particular Vision Zero improvements that don't get transportation impact tax credit because they don't have capacity. For example, a few weeks ago, the planning board approved a project in Bethesda, or Germantown rather, near Montgomery College, that had access onto 355 in the vicinity of 118. And the Department of Transportation in Development Review concluded there needed to be a traffic light because there's too much traffic trying to turn left with no intersection right next to the intersection with 118. So it's unsafe for cars to be exiting that side street right next to a major intersection like 118 and 355. So a traffic light costs at a four intersection costs somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. That's a pretty significant hit to one project, which was, a small apartment building. We agreed that it was necessary, and at DOT's recommendation required them to build it. And that was strongly resisted by the developer, who very reasonably said that's really a pretty disproportionate hit to us. So this is an example of what I mean when I say there are transportation improvements that are necessary that don't add capacity, but they're not just nice to have. It's not just a question of taking a sidewalk that was too narrow and widening it a little bit. Some of these are very expensive. They're important for safety. In this case, this is the safety of cars, not safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, but that's still a Vision Zero priority. And yet that applicant's not going to get the transportation impact tax credit. I'm not sure if it will stop the project or not, but it shows you how there can be a transportation improvement that is really essential. Everybody agrees it should be done. It should be done by this developer. But because it doesn't add capacity, we're asking them to just absorb that into the cost of the project and not get any credit for it.
Okay, I'm going to vote for this now. I have some concerns about this, but it's such a complex issue. I don't think we can litigate it within this context. I think the committee made the right recommendation, but I think there's some issues that we ought to explore a little bit more. So I'll leave it there.
On the council.
Hey, Gary, we hear you.
Did you want to speak, or did you?
I think Gary's pulling a Glenn.
Oh. We all should. Okay. I do support this. And in all fairness, to your example, Casey, the fact that the developer has to put up this this traffic light, I'm in agreement with it, but the developer is paying for traffic that's already there in many cases. And so they should get some relief for what they're helping, the traffic that's already there, plus they're helping themselves. But there's a nexus, but candidly, they should get some relief as well. I agree with you. So if this is, please, Councilmember Freets.
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree. I think Councilmember Reamer is right. I think we should take this up maybe even as a joint GeoFed issue, because I think it does cross over, but it needs to be addressed. I don't think it could be addressed here. I think there needs to be a thoughtful solution to this. We don't want to get into a situation where we're providing credits for things that aren't accomplishing what we intend them to do, or replacing things that the impact tax was intended for. But we are changing what we mean by transportation improvements. And what we used to consider to be an improvement, in some cases, doesn't improve the situation at all. And things that that don't impact capacity for cars may provide improvements for pedestrians otherwise. So
glasses, since I have to sit here planted in front of the
laptop for the moment. JC, you're not on mute. There you go.
So I think there's an opportunity to address this, but I think we need to do it as a standalone after the growth policy is completed.
Thank you. Is this without objection? Very good. Dr. Orland.
Okay, the next is I turn it back over to Mr. Friedson and Mr. Reamer. They have a proposal regarding on the impact tax for dealing with storage facilities related to agritourism. This came up after the last GEO work session, so there's no committee recommendation on this. So let me turn it over to them.
Thanks. I'll kick it off, and Mr. Friedson, I'm sure will have additional comments. Right now, if you are making wine, for example, and you have a segment of your facility that is essentially wine storage, you're going to get charged as though you are generating a lot of trips for that wine storage facility. And that's just not fair. And the Ag Reserve has a pretty high impact tax rate. And we shouldn't charge people for generating trips if they don't generate trips. That's kind of the bottom line. And what this is trying to do is just correct that, so that the part of a facility that is actually not used by the customer, but is part of, essentially the agricultural operation is not taxed as though it is a customer-facing, trip-generating part of the operation. County executive, I believe, I know he's recommended this, and he's been working with, at least one applicant that's facing frankly, an outlandish bill for putting up a facility. And there are more facilities that want to come in. We're on the verge of becoming a wine destination. It turns out that there is a lot of land in Montgomery County that is highly desirable for growing grapes. And the hills of Clarksburg, for example, are going to become renowned, and at least according to very, very successful winemakers. Well, we want that to happen, but if we are charging a tax rate as though a storage facility for wine is a CVS generating, constant trips in and out, like this plane's never going to take off. So that's what this is. We're trying to just constrain this as appropriate and make sure that we're not unduly or unfairly charging these facilities when they want to come in.
Thank you. Councilmember Freeze.
Yeah, just very briefly, just to build on that, we've worked with the county executive and with planning and council staff. Really appreciate the collaboration and coordination on this. This is referring to the processing and storage aspect of the business specifically. It's not generating the type of trips as the retail tourism side of it. There's consensus on that. I hope we move this forward and adopt this new rate. And then separately from this, I do think, and both Councilor Reamer and I would like to pursue us looking at the retail side of it as well and coming up with a standard that reflects the unique nature of these retail businesses, which are not the same as other retail businesses in other parts of the county, do not generate the same types of trips and therefore should not be subject to the same impact taxes. But hopefully this is a consensus proposal that everybody can get behind, and look forward for our continued effort to grow our burgeoning wine industry, our agritourism industry, to make sure that the agricultural reserve is not just environmentally sustainable, but economically sustainable for our local farmers. And this is a modest but important step in that direction.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much to both Councilmember Reamer and Councilmember Friedson. This whole thing started because of Windridge Vineyards. And when I was talking to Robert Butts about his facility that's directly across the street from me, it was staggering in terms of the amount of money that they were trying to charge for this facility that was sheerly just processing wine. And if you go there and take a look at the facility, it's very similar to the areas that you'll see in some of our breweries and pubs throughout the county as well, but something in which it's very clear that in that area, for that square footage, the only thing that's being done is processing and doesn't generate any kind of transportation modality. In fact, because then they bottle and do a lot of their stuff there on site. And so it really is one in which it just defies logic as to why this is. And so I'm very, very happy that we finally come up with a resolution to address this issue, because as Councilmember Reamer said, it is very clear that from the hills of Clarksburg to everywhere in between, wherever we have that rocky Black Hill region that we know that is Montgomery County, it makes great struggle. And that is prime for wine. So it's very exciting. And again, keeping in spirit of what it is that we're trying to do in promoting agritourism, promoting businesses to continue to locate here in the county and providing jobs. I can't tell you how many jobs have been provided, not just for the people who work at the winery, but also with the food trucks and various other things that come there. It's an economic boon for the county. And so it's great to see a solution come about.
Thank you. And you didn't just say that it was staggering over a winery, did you? I'm sure you didn't say that. Anyhow.
I did, actually.
Councilmember Albornoz.
Just very quickly, I just commend everybody that worked on this. This is really exciting. I think on a number of different levels. And I know that the county executive announced at the beginning of his term he was going to be looking systemically at those issues that were preventing certain industries from being able to move forward. And I think this is an example of where we need to do more of this in other sectors and use creative approaches to sometimes get out of our own way. So this one perked my interest, and I appreciate everybody that worked on it.
Thank you. This was a recommendation by the committee, correct?
No. Yes, it was. No, this was. I'm sorry, this was not.
It's a majority of the committee is proposing it, but this came about
Right.
after the committee's
That's where the
deliberations.
confusion was with me.
Correct.
So,
The committee did not have the
somebody making a
benefit of-
motion? Is somebody making a motion?
I will make a motion for the proposal as explained in the packet.
Second.
Councilor Friesen, a second. All those in favor of it, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Yes, that is, I don't know if everybody's here. That is unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, there's only 3 more issues that we can do it in like 2 minutes.
All right.
The
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, let me go. Okay, the planning board's recommending designating a Vision Zero representative to the Development Review Committee. Actually, DOT is responsible for this anyway, and so what the committee recommended, 3-0, is to add language to a bill that would need to be introduced having to do with revisioning the subdivision ordinance with a new phrase that's underlined in the middle of circle 20 of page 26. So it lists DOT as a member of the DRC and lists all the things they have to do in DRC. And then at the end, it says, with all reviews consistent with the objective to achieve Vision Zero goals.
Any objection? Without objection. Okay, Glenn.
The next recommendation is to do something the planning board's been doing for years anyway. Not quite sure why it's in here at all, but nevertheless, they recommended the continuing producing the travel monitoring report, which was something that was actually requested by Ms. Florine back in the mid-aughts, and they have produced this report regularly. And so Councilmembers Reamer and Friedson did concur with the planning board. And again, this was in the meeting that Mr. Jawando had to leave early. So it was a unanimous recommendation of those who were present.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando, did you want to comment on that? Your thumbs up was the comment. Let the record show we had a thumbs up. Is that without objection? Without objection.
Okay, the final thing is actually the planning board had recommended a whole way of doing policy area review. We basically, for master plans, what we do is we look at the balance between proposed land use and proposed transportation, and proposing a whole new way of doing that. That's not really part of the SSP itself because the SSP has to do with subdivision approvals, but it is something that's important to figure out, particularly with master plans that are coming up. So the committee recommended deferring this and not including this information or a decision on this in this SSP, but to schedule something soon to review this. And in fact, we have a meeting scheduled for December 9th to do exactly that.
Okay, so we're not voting on that, is what you're saying.
The committee's recommendation is not to include this issue in this SSP for now, and to follow up separately.
Can we refer to it from now on as the what used to be the formerly known as a subdivision staging policy? Is that
Well,
the next decision point?
Yeah, there you go.
Yes and no. You actually need a new bill for that.
Okay.
The law has to change, but once that's done, yes.
Very good.
And for that, is Pam? Are you still around after all this?
Yep, I'm still here.
Pam's going to handle this one, I think. The name.
Yes. This was a recommendation that was first and foremost in the draft that came over from the planning board, and proposes to change the name of the subdivision staging policy. Their recommendation was to call it the county growth policy. And after much discussion with the committee, interesting. So people weighed in on both sides. The idea that the subdivision staging policy is a name that is relatively narrow, and we know that the adequate public facility ordinance, to which this really applies, and to what these are rules that set in place what is adequate, and how those standards for adequacy, how they should work, it's applied at more than just subdivision. It's also site plan on occasion. It can be applied at building permit. So there was this idea that it's really about adequacy, rules for adequacy, infrastructure, and growth. So a lot of conversation back and forth, and the committee, I believe 2 members of the committee recommended or they unanimously agreed upon a name change from subdivision staging policy to the growth and infrastructure policy. Really as a way to show to the public, worry that if you call it as broad as the growth policy, you'll get comments unrelated to what it really is, which is really about infrastructure and adequacy. When we had this done back in, and Dr. Lund remembers this in 2009, the White Flint Master Plan was going on. And when the subdivision staging policy came through back then, called the growth policy, half of the testimony the council received was on the White Flint Master Plan. People were confused about the role of what this policy does. So they were basically coming to public hearing with relevant comments, but totally not relevant to the policy they were discussing. So the name change occurred in just after that. In 2010, the name was changed to subdivision staging policy. But again, thinking that can be somewhat narrow, there's an idea that it should be a little broader, and that's what the committee recommended.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
I just wanted to note that this was 3-0, and this was a perfect example of a collaboration, and I think I appreciate my colleagues coming together, and as Ms. Dunn said, to represent both sides, both the growth side and the adequacy, and just call it what it is. So thank you for that, and appreciate my colleague.
Thank you. Councilmember Ream.
Thanks. I really feel strongly about this. I think it's so important. I'm glad the board made this recommendation. I think language can really serve to bring people in, or it can serve to keep people out. And I think when we call something an adequate public facilities ordinance, we immediately lose everybody who, frankly, doesn't want this to be, their calling. And I think we want to find ways to say this is accessible, this is for you, everybody can be part of this. And just saying growth and infrastructure, people know what that means. So I'm glad we did this. I really think it's a great idea.
Okay. Mr. Drummer.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to have a substantive comment. Just to point out that if you do this, there's no bill that's been introduced to do this. We would have to then go through the entire code, find all the references to subdivision staging policy, change the name, which we can do, but it's not going to happen this week. It's going to require a new bill introduced to do it. I just want to say that procedurally, it's fine, we can do it. It's just procedurally, there's no bill. The planning board didn't send over a bill that would do this.
Maybe the Fed committee can sponsor that bill, Mr. Reamer, to put forward, or however, but yes, thank you.
So, and which is a great idea, and I'm certainly supportive of changing the name. But having said that, so at this point, there is not even a consensus that we can discuss, or there's a consensus, I guess.
Well, you can go ahead and discuss it. We'll introduce it, with the Fed committee. It's just going to have to go through a separate thing. I just don't want people to think is like the name was changed just because you changed the name on top of the resolution. That's not going to be enough because you have to go through the code and change it. Okay.
Are we all fine with that? We all understood, Mr. Drummer, and everybody else. Thank you very much.
I hope you got an intern, Bob. Okay.
Well, they have, software that does that stuff. But go
I
ahead.
thought that the Fed committee chair felt so strongly about this that he was offering to do that himself.
That's right. He was going to review it and make sure.
Language has the ability to bring people together or keep people away, and we got to get on this, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that. And I don't know that we want to hear the language he's about to say to you. But anyhow, Dr. Orland, was there anything else? We're good? Anything else from the group? Very good. Well, I think it should be noted. We came in under budget. It's 456. Yeah. What were we going to say?
I was just going to say it's called Control F, find and replace.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
I just want to say I'm glad we scheduled this session. Thank you, Mr. Council President. I think we'll have a manageable agenda for the next session, and we can wrap this up.
Well, that would be nice. Very good. Yes, Mr. Conklin, did you have anything? Oh, okay. Andrew, did you?
Yeah, please. I thought it was a terrific session. It was extremely organized. I really appreciate it. I think we have a very manageable coming up. I think it would be helpful to similarly set expectations. We talked today about getting through all of the transportation, which we now have done, that let everybody understand exactly what the decision points were. It made it easy to go through this packet, and I just hope we can do exactly the same so that the public understands what is going to happen, and council members and staff understand, what are the specific decision points we're going to have on Tuesday and what's the order that they're going to be decided. So I hope we can manage that very similar to how we managed it today. And I think this has been a really productive and helpful meeting. So I just wanted to thank everybody for that.
Thank you. Perhaps lightning can strike twice. Perhaps, we'll see. But anyhow, thank you all very, very much for being with us. We are adjourned.
Line 270 from Clarksburg Road, Maryland 121 to the truck skills.
1/2 of normal